Hey guys. This is part 8 of What If Sasuke Was in Lord of the Rings. Hit like and subscribe if you like this one, and also please check the author in the description. Let's start.
We are paid, that's all. We are God.
Chapter 30, The Aftermath. Location, Minas Tirith. The battle for the city and for Gondor itself was over. The city had held, and the orc horde, along with their Haradrim allies, lay dead in the fields. But they weren't alone. Alongside them were the bodies of the Rohirrim, both men and horses. A smoke-like fog had settled in the fields, giving the place an eerie feel and look to it all. As Gandalf walked through the bodies of the dead, he saw Aragorn standing before the army of Oathbreakers. The man, along with his companions and army, had arrived from the river, sailed the ships of Umbar, taking the orcs there by surprise. That wasn't the only thing that had been taken by surprise. The undead army swept through the orcs, cutting them down like they were nothing and moving across the battlefield like a wind carried them. They even slaughtered the orcs inside the city, which was how the White Wizard was there at that moment, with Pippin by his side. "Release us," the King of the Dead demanded of Aragorn, his entire army standing behind him. The man didn't say anything, but the dwarf beside him did. "Bad idea," said Gimli. "Very handy in a tight spot, these lads, despite the fact they're dead." Hugo had something else to say about it all. "He made a promise, Gimli," he said quietly. "The monster speaks true. You gave us your word," the King of the Dead told the King of Gondor. There was no venom or rancor in his voice at the use of the word monster, for he meant it as a description, not an insult. Whether Hugo took it as the former or the latter, he did not show it on his face. It was only then that Aragorn spoke. "I hold your oath fulfilled," he declared to the King of the Dead with a humble voice. Hope filled the dead eyes of the ghost, and the army at his back. "Go. Be at peace." A sigh of relief escaped the ghost's lips as a gentle wind blew through, sending wisps of his hair up to dance. The Oathbreakers began to vanish into the wind, scattering to pieces and floating away in the wind. The last they saw was the king's face, happy, joyful, and content. Then it was gone, and they were left standing in a field of dead soldiers. Aragorn turned to look upon the wizard. "Hail, Gandalf," he said quietly. "Hail, King Aragorn," the wizard said in return, bowing his head. "What do we do now?" Hugo asked the king before him. He looked out at the field and saw the dead lying there, broken banners hanging over their heads like eerie trees. "What must always be done," he said. "We gather the dead and tend to the wounded, if there are any." The orange-haired shinobi saw the same thing he did. "All right, let's get to work," he said, striding forward amongst the dead. The others followed him in silence, for such a task should not be taken with conversation in hand. It was a grim business, but one that had to be done. There were others already amongst the dead, looking through the bodies to see if there was anyone alive still. Smoke rose from everywhere, creating a fog that seemed to make the fields otherworldly. Pippin wasn't looking to see if there was anyone still alive, as selfish as that may be. He was looking for Merry, to see if his friend was still alive. He stumbled through the fields, almost tripping over the bodies lying there, but always managing to find his balance again. "You have to keep going," his mind whispered to him. "You must find him." He didn't know how long he had wandered the field of death. It may have been an hour, 2 hours, maybe only a few minutes. But he finally saw a familiar green cloak amongst the bodies. He ran over to it, picking it up and seeing the familiar leaf. "Merry," he whispered. "No!" screamed Eomer, his voice echoing through the silence. All eyes turned to him as he ran through the corpses, dropping his sword and helm, only to collapse by the side of one of the bodies. He picked it up and wailed a long, painful wail. Pippin realized with a lurch in his stomach why he was screaming with a look of anguish on his face. He was holding Eowyn. She rode into battle? He couldn't help but think. And now, she was most likely dead. But to his surprise, someone rushed over to Eomer's side. It was a lady with long blonde hair and some kind of clothing colored in purple, which was a rare dye to have. But the style of the clothes was enough to make any mother scream in horror and cover their children's eyes at the sight of it. She knelt down beside him and began placing her hands over Yoin. "What are you doing?" Ymir demanded with a tear-filled voice. The lady didn't say anything as she continued to place her hands on his sister. "I said, what are you doing?" She looked up at him for a moment, and turned her attention back to Yoin. The third marshal of the mark looked like he was about to strike her when Izuna came rushing up. "My lord Ymir," the half-elf said as he came to a stop before them all. The blood on his armor and on Aglos showed that he had been in the battle. "Forgive me, but I don't think she speaks the common tongue." He turned to the woman and began speaking in a different language. It was slowly and haltingly, but it made her snap her head upwards to look at him. From Pippin's position, he saw the surprise in her eyes. She spoke and Pippin could tell that there was a question in her voice. It was rapid, but he could tell it was the same language he had spoken. It was slow as Izuna stumbled with his words, his grasp of the language shaky at best. But as the seconds drew on, it became more and more firm. Finally, he looked away from her and back at Ymir. "She's checking to see if Lady Yoin was still alive, and she's wondering if you're related to her somehow." "She's my sister," the third marshal answered. The half-elf told the woman that very thing. She looked up from her once more, giving the man a comforting look. Then she went back to her work again, her hand coming alight with a green energy of sorts. It vanished almost as soon as it appeared, and as everyone stared at her in confusion, she turned and whistled loudly. A brown-haired man in red clothing plated with armor came running over to her almost as soon as she was done whistling. They spoke quickly in the foreign tongue, and then he reached down and picked up Yoin, holding her like he would a baby. Ymir rose as well and tried to take her back. Izuna stopped him and said something short to the woman. She answered back just as short, and he nodded in acknowledgement. "She says that Lady Yoin is alive, Lord Ymir," he said quickly. "Her friend is taking her to the city gates so that she might get proper treatment." The brown-haired man took off for the ruined gate, and the third marshal of the mark did not stop him. A shout reached their ears from the other side of the field. A person in black was waving his arms rapidly, and shouting something just as quickly as he stood next to one of the Mumikil. "What is he saying?" Ymir asked. Izuna looked at the woman, speaking again in that foreign language. She answered shortly and ran towards the green man. She said something about a child, he translated. For a moment, no one understood what she was talking about. There had been no children in the battle. Then looks of recognition began to spread among the people who had seen and knew that Mary had ridden into battle. Pippin was the first to start running towards the black man, almost falling down a couple of times but always managing to get back up. "Mary!" he shouted as he came closer to where the green person was. Another man with a giant dog stood in his way, trying to stop him from coming closer. But he would not stay put. With an ease he hadn't really used since the Shire, he slipped past the man and kept running forward. He heard Izuna shouting something in the foreign tongue behind him, but he didn't pay attention to that. "Mary!" he shouted again as he kept running. He soon reached the man and began looking around for his friend. He found him lying beside a dead Haradrim warrior, from whom he had probably been pulled out from under. "Mary!" the took of the two said, reaching down and holding the brandy buck in his arms. "Mary, it's me. It's Pippin!" Tears began to leak out of his eyes at the sight of his friends. To his relief, Mary managed to crack open his eyes. "I knew you'd find me," he croaked out. "Yes," Pippin agreed with a smile. "Are you going to leave me?" "No, Mary, I'm going to look after you." As his friend closed his eyes again, Pippin reached for a nearby cloak. But before he could place it on Mary, the hobbit was picked up by a woman with pink hair of all things. "Put him down, now!" Pippin ordered her, standing up and drawing his sword. "Pippin, wait!" Izuna shouted as he came running up. "She's taking him to the city. Take a look around." He did and saw that other people in strange clothing were doing the same, running with a speed he had only seen Izuna and Sasuke manage to reach. They were carrying people to the gate of the city, and leaving them there to get more wounded. It was a strange sight to see that they weren't taking them into the city itself, just outside the gates. Even as he took notice, suddenly it felt like all the strength he had with him since the beginning of the battle had vanished. He felt so exhausted and tired, he fell to the ground. Or at least he would have if a pair of hands hadn't grabbed hold of him. As he faded into the bliss of unconsciousness, the last thing he saw were blue eyes looking reassuringly down at him. Night had fallen again on Minas Tirith. The fields outside had still not been cleared of the dead, for the people inside were taking care that those who had been wounded could still be saved. The houses of healing were bursting with the wounded, and the healers there had their hands full. Even when Aragorn offered his services to help them, taking care of Eowyn first, they were still full. As the night went on, Sasuke found himself waiting by Izuna, Legolas, and Gimli outside the houses of healing. Even though he knew how to treat a wound, the shinobi didn't have the knowledge needed to save lives. Neither did Izuna, Legolas, or Gimli. They were better off staying outside than trying to help inside. No one said a word, and besides, no one could find any words to say. Sasuke didn't say anything because he kept going over what had happened when he found old Oda after the battle had been won. He had told the old man what had happened to his grandson, and he had grown silent. The only words he had said were to thank him for giving him the news in person. But the grief he had was obvious once one looked into his eyes. Sasuke didn't know what else to say at that moment, so he left the old man to his grief. Hopefully, the body would be returned to him so a proper burial could be given. But with the mass amount of dead in and out of the city, he did not have high hopes, or any hope. They all watched in silence as men went to and from the houses of healing. Many were taking wounded to the houses, but there were some that were taking away corpses. It was a morbid thing to see, and they saw a lot of it. It just added to their air of silence, even as they listened to screams and shouts of pain coming from the houses. For those of them who had very good hearing, which meant everyone sans the dwarf, they could also hear men and boys crying for their mothers amidst all the noise. "Why do they cry?" Legolas asked aloud and quietly at the same time. "It's because they're in pain, elf," Gimli said in a gruff voice. "I know you're immortal, but even you feel pain." That wasn't what he was talking about, Izuna said as he kept listening. He wanted to stop, but he couldn't, not when his sensei was right there, and not baiting an eye. Well then, what was he talking about? "Why do they cry for their mothers?" Legolas asked again, this time to him. But it was Sasuke who answered. "It's because in the back of their minds, they know that no matter what has happened to them, their mothers will make it all better." He knew that was true, having gone through it himself. Back in the early days, he would wake up from nightmares about that night, and wanted his mother to come in and assure him that everything was all right. Those days were long gone, but they still made his heart ache at the memory of his parents. The elf stayed silent at those words. He had never really known his own mother, and his father had never really talked about her, making him grow up without ever really having his mother take care of him when he was sick or hurt. But Izuna had those times, and it just made him miss his mother even more. His eyes turned to the wall reaching overhead. He could not see the fields that lay beyond, but he knew that they were there, and what lay beyond them, Mordor and Minas Morgul. "Are you still alive, mother?" he asked himself. As the hours passed, the men going to and from the houses dwindled somewhat, but they did not stop. It was only when they saw Aragorn come from the houses did they finally move from where they stood. "How are they, laddie?" Gimli asked the man. "Lady Eowyn and Mary will be fine," he answered. "He will recover more quickly than her, as he only suffered a burn on his hand." "What of Pippin?" Izuna asked him. "He was simply tired. He will be back on his feet by tomorrow." "And the rest?" said Legolas. There he turned grim at. "Some will die, that much is certain. How many, I do not know, and I do not wish to know." He frowned slightly. "I believe that the aid that came to us might be able to save more lives than I can, but I have not seen them since the battle had ended." The rest of them, save for Sasuke, all shared a look at those words. "I think that might be because they haven't entered the city yet," Gimli answered. Aragorn swung his attention onto the dwarf. "What?" "You heard me, laddie. They're standing outside the gate. They're not moving, they're not doing anything. They're just standing." "I believe they are waiting," Legolas added. At those words, Sasuke began walking away. "Sensei, where are you going?" Izuna called after him once he realized that he was leaving. "I'm going to them," he said back. and I'm going alone. He knew that they would already be following him. He just hoped that those words would keep them inside the city. His walk down the levels of the city didn't seem to last as long as it should have. It all just went past him. But as he stared at the open gate, able to see the ruined fields beyond, it all came right at him with the force of a sledgehammer. He knew that it was dark beyond in the fields, which didn't have the torchlight like the city had. But even then, and even without the use of his Sharingan, he could see how many people were standing out there, waiting. He counted 11 in total, as well as a large dog. They were there, outside the gate, waiting for him. For a moment, he didn't do anything. All of a sudden, the reality of it was right in front of his face. They were there, just outside the gate, after 10 years away. 10 years. Those two, almost inconspicuous, words now loomed over his head. He knew that nothing was the same as he remembered it. In that brief moment, he considered turning around and walking away, to let things go as they have been. But once that moment passed, the rest of his mind quashed that thought like a bug. You knew this would be the scenario when you asked Indra to call his brother, he reminded himself. You might as well get it over with. He straightened his gaze along with his back and walked out of the gate. To their credit, none of the others followed him out. He kept his eyes on them as he came closer, finally stopping about a foot away from them. They stood there, staring at one another. Sasuke didn't say anything to them, but not because he felt like it. There were no words that seemed to work at that moment. He just stood there, in silence, looking at people he had once called friends, not knowing what to say to them. We saw your signal, their leader told him in Elemental, a solemn and serious expression on his face. But then it was ruined by the smirk on his lips. Wasn't I supposed to be the loud one who liked to show off? That barbed comment was all he needed. You still are. All I did was send you a signal. You're the one who decided to turn into a gigantic fox to attack the Mumikil. You and I both know that you could have done the same thing with a less flashy entrance. Excuse me for trying to make sure that you saw we had acknowledged your signal. I know you hate it when I ignore what you tell me. He couldn't help but snort. Well, at least you learned something in the past decade. And here I thought you were going to get dumber. That might have set some people off into a fit of rage, and he knew that if they were 10 years younger, the man standing before him would have started yelling angrily. But instead, what he did was laugh. Then he stepped forward and engulfed Sasuke in a big bear hug. It's good to see you again, you bastard, he declared. Caught off guard by the hug, when really, he should have been expecting it, Sasuke didn't do anything at first. But then, he reached up and returned the hug. It's good to see you too, Dobe, he replied quietly, only loud enough for the both of them to hear him. The blonde soon broke the hug and stepped back, allowing Sasuke to look at him once more. He had grown taller again, easily matching his own height if not just a little bit taller. And by that hug alone the uchiha knew that he had packed on some more muscle. His hands were more calloused than the last time he had seen them, although there was a long thin scar on his left that disappeared up into his sleeve, suggesting that things hadn't always been peaceful back in the nations. He had let his hair grow shaggier but kept it contained to his head, letting the strands touch the air above his shoulders while the rest was held back by his headband. If Sasuke had to guess, he was trying to either imitate his father or godfather in that regard, but someone kept making sure it didn't. There was some hardness in his blue eyes, but not enough to suggest he had become cynical. In fact, he probably still believed in people. He wore white pants and a black jacket that had green prayer beads wrapped around the left arm. He also wore a black haori that stylized orange flames at the bottom. The black was the color of night, and the orange was the color of a sunset. There was some stiffness in the clothes, suggesting that they were partly armor. Sasuke took his eyes off his friend and looked at the rest of the Konoha 11, first settling on someone also familiar. Hello, Sakura, he said to the pink-haired Kunoichi. She wore a shirt much like his, only hers was a deep crimson red with black edges and had a mesh shirt peeking out beneath. Whether it was short-sleeved or not, it was hidden by a white jacket. A pink sash was wrapped around her waist, and beneath that was a pair of dark brown pants. She had grown out her hair again, but not to the same length as their genin days. This time, it just touched her back. She came forward beside Naruto. "Hello, Sasuke," she said to him, while idly wrapping her hand around Naruto's. He saw this and instantly understood what it meant. Apparently she was the one who kept the blonde's hair in check. He looked around at the others, taking notice of them all. Shikamaru had become the spitting image of his father, goatee and all, as well as dressed in the uniform of a Konoha Jonin, including the flak jacket. Choji had surprisingly slimmed down some in the past decade, having also cut his hair short, and had begun growing a beard. He wore fewer pieces of armor, but that hadn't stopped him from attacking the Mumikil with his jutsus. The only thing that really looked different about Ino was that she had grown out her hair to the point where it reached the back of her knees, albeit braided. Her clothes had remained the same, her skirt had just become longer. Shino also looked the same, just taller, and had added a flak jacket to his clothes. Hinata had changed her clothes more radically than her teammate, wearing a sleeveless blouse with an obi around her waist and pants that covered all of her legs. They were all dark in color, which contrasted with her pale skin and complemented her long dark hair. Kiba wore a flak jacket beneath a fur coat with gray pants on his legs and black fingerless gloves on his hands. His hair had grown out, and like Shikamaru, he had a goatee. Sitting by his legs was a dog that looked suspiciously like Akamaru, which didn't up to the math Sasuke mentally did concerning the dog's age. Rock Lee looked the same as he did 10 years ago, only more muscular, and had exchanged his green jumpsuit for a black one with a flak jacket. Tenten wore the same clothes as well, but her clothing was obviously armored, which made him wonder if she was the one who gave Naruto his clothing, and she too wore a flak jacket. And Sai was the same as well, with only his shirt actually covering his upper body and a large scroll being carried on his back. As he looked at them all, it became clear that Naruto and Sakura weren't the only ones who had gotten together. Hinata stood close to Kiba and Ino did the same with Sai, although he wasn't sure with Lee and Tenten. "I would say hello to the rest of you as well, but I don't know if you would accept it," he finally said to them all. Not surprisingly, Kiba barked out a laugh. "If we didn't feel the same way those two felt, why would we be here?" he asked, pointing at both Naruto and Sakura with his thumb. "Because he told you to come," he mentally said. "He didn't tell us to come," Ino told him. "He asked us and we said yes." Then she smiled at him. "And no, I didn't invade your mind. I just knew that you were thinking it." "I know that you weren't in my head," he said shortly. He looked at Naruto. "How did you know?" "I had a dream of Ashura a few months back. He told me what happening over here and said that you needed help," he replied. "So we came. We got here as soon as we could, but the battle was already occurring." "I know. I was there at the beginning. Why didn't you enter the city after the battle?" "Well, we couldn't just walk in without permission, even if we did help end the battle. That would have been rude." He restrained the urge to roll his eyes and instead snorted a laugh. "I guess someone has finally tried to teach you some manners." The blonde just smiled. "That. And I was certain it was the surest way to get you to come to us." He just turned around. "Come on, let's go. They could use your help in the houses of healing." There was the barest of smiles on his face as he turned, for he was happy to see them all again. But as they all started walking, he let Naruto take the lead slightly, letting him see his back. As he had expected, the characters were there, but what had surprised him was the number. "Who did you succeed?" he asked the blonde as he quickened his pace again so that they walked side by side. If Naruto was surprised by the question, he didn't show it. "Kakashi-sensei," he answered. "And before you ask, no, he wasn't late to the induction ceremony. He hasn't been late to things for the past decade. You miss it, don't you?" And his excuses, he agreed. "Although, I've been meaning to use Lost on the Road of Life for some time, but Sakura wouldn't let me." "I'm not going to let you take on Sensei's bad habits," she said with a sweat on his arm. It was obvious that she was holding her strength back, otherwise he would have gone flying through the field. "If you start it, you know damn well who would take after you. And I am not going to hear my children tell me that they got lost on the road of life when they show up 2 hours late." He caught those words and knew full well what they had implied. But he put it to the back of his mind as they approached the gate, where Aragorn and the others waited. They came to a stop and he stepped forward, acting as translator. "This is Naruto Uzumaki, then Nanadame Hokage of Kanahigakura of Southern Earth and his men, he introduced the shinobi to them. He asks permission to enter the city and help in any way he can. All eyes fell on Aragorn. As he was technically the king of the city and of Gondor, it fell to him to answer. He and his friends are welcome to enter and to aid, he replied. He nodded and looked to Naruto. Who are they? The blonde asked him, looking at the people before him. The man is Aragorn, son of Arathorn. The elf is Legolas, prince of Mirkwood. The dwarf is Gimli, son of Gloin. He pointed to each person as he spoke their names. Then he rested his eyes on the last one. And he's my student, Izuna Uchiha, son of Madara Uchiha, a half-elf. He paused for a moment, letting the information sink into their minds and to see their reactions. Aragorn has welcomed you to enter and help in any way you can. Tell him he has my thanks, Naruto replied. Then he turned to look at the others. Sakura, Ino, head to where the injured are and help tend to them. Team 8, go through the city and help find anyone who has gone missing during the battle. The rest of you, keep a watch on the walls. If you see any second attack forces coming for the city, I want one to stay behind and warn us while the others attack, he ordered them all. No one argued against his orders, they just nodded their acknowledgement. Izuna, Sasuke said to his student, getting his attention. Take these two women to the houses of healing and translate for them. He pointed at Sakura and Ino to emphasize his point. Izuna nodded in acknowledgement. With a small gesture, he beckoned them to follow. The rest of the night passed with such busy work. All those who had duties in the city tended to them. But by morning, Gandalf had called a meeting for the fellowship and invited Ymir to join them. Sasuke brought Naruto along to the meeting. Even though he did not speak the common tongue, he belonged there. Fortunately, no one objected. They gathered in the hall of the king. Both Sasuke and Naruto kept near the door but stayed close enough to watch all of them. Izuna stood nearby. Both Uchiha clansmen had changed out of their armor, but that did not mean they didn't think they weren't in danger. Frodo has passed beyond my sight, Gandalf declared after a long moment of silence. To hear him say that was troubling. The darkness is deepening. If Sauron had the ring we would know it, Aragorn remarked as he idly stared at one of the statues of his ancestors. It's only a matter of time. He has suffered a defeat, yes, but behind the walls of Mordor our enemy is regrouping. Let him stay there. Let him rot, Gimli said from where he sat on the throne of the steward, smoking his pipe. Why should we care? Because 10,000 orcs now stand between Frodo and Mount Doom, the White Wizard told him, making him go silent and think about those words. But Gandalf himself could not help but feel guilty. I've sent him to his death. There Aragorn disagreed with him, for he had an idea. No. There is still hope for Frodo. He needs time and safe passage across the plains of Gorgoroth. We can give him that. How? Asked Gimli, asking the question that everyone was wondering. Draw out Sauron's armies. Empty his lands. Then we gather our full strength and march on the Black Gate. His answer made the dwarf on the throne cough on his own smoke. The suicide tactic? Thought Sasuke, frowning slightly. He could see the merits of it, but that still didn't mean he thought that it was a good idea. What are they talking about, Sasuke? Naruto asked him quietly. A plan of action, he replied. We cannot achieve victory through strength of arms, Ymir pointed out to Aragorn. Not for ourselves. But we can give Frodo his chance if we keep Sauron's eye fixed upon us. Keep him blind to all else that moves. A diversion, Legolas remarked, seeing the point of it all. Certainty of death, small chance of success, Gimli listed off what would happen to them all if they went with this plan. It sounded like he was against it, only to finish with a single question. What are we waiting for? Sauron will suspect a trap, Gandalf said to Aragorn. He will not take the bait. Oh, I think he will, the king of Gondor replied before turning to look at the person no one expected. Izuna, I shall require your aid in this. Me? Izuna repeated, surprised by those words. Yes. When the hour was dark and the night had fallen over the city once more, Aragorn and Izuna came back into the hall of the king. In the man's hand was Andúril, and in the half-elf's was Aeglos. In silence, they approached the thrones where Gandalf had placed his wrapped palantir on the steps. From behind them, Sasuke and Naruto watched in silence. A silent reason had whispered in Krabender's ear that he needed to be here for this, he and his friend. Aragorn took the palantir off the steps and placed it on the ground. Kneeling down to it, Izuna pulled away the cloth whilst Aragorn knelt too. A flash of light appeared before their eyes from the orb, making them avert their gaze for a moment. But as they reached out and took hold of the palantir, taking it up off the ground with their hands, they looked at it, and saw the eye of Sauron looking back at them. The black speech filled their ears as they listened to his voice speak to them. What he was saying, they did not know, and at that moment, they did not care. "Long have you hunted and tormented us," Aragorn said to the eye. "Long have we eluded and endured you," Izuna spoke. The next two words spoken, they spoke as one. "No more! Behold the sword of Elendil!" Aragorn cried, holding Andúril's hilt in sight of the palantir. "And gaze upon the spear of Gil-galad," Izuna declared, bringing the blade of Aeglos before the eye while also activating his Sharingan. They did not know what Sauron would do next, so they had no defense for it. The Dark Lord took what he had seen as a petty move, so he responded in kind. To Aragorn, he showed Arwen, the elven woman he loved, dying alone. To Izuna, he showed his mother being tortured and tormented in the bowls of Minas Morgul. For the ranger, he could hear his name on Arwen's lips, and for the half-elf, he could hear his mother screaming. Tears began to leak out of his eyes as they began to morph into the Mangekyo Sharingan. He could not bear to look anymore. With a cry, he threw the palantir away, making Aragorn stumble back in surprise and inadvertently causing the Evenstar to smash against the floor, shattering it to pieces. The palantir flew through the air and all eyes stayed focused on it. When he saw that it was about hit the ground, Sasuke reacted instantly. He threw out his left hand and caught the stone right in his palm. The eye of Sauron found him with his Sharingan blazing. The black speech grew louder and more forceful, making them all hear it. It sounded like Sauron was trying to command him. But his eyes remained focused on the stone, unwavering and unyielding. He stared into the eye of Sauron and looked deeper than any other had dared to do. Suddenly, he saw the scene of a battle, of opposing forces clashing against each other. Something deep inside him told him that he had been there, and it was the battle that ended an age. He saw all of it, and yet, he also saw just one little part. But that one part made him all the more confident. "I see you," he said in a voice that commanded attention, and it did. The words of the black speech died away instantly. "I see what you did when last we met in combat. You ran. You turned and fled from me because you feared me. You only turned your attentions to Gil-galad and Elendil because you knew if we met in combat, you would not win. I am coming, Sauron. I am coming for you. But I will not be coming alone." He did not know if he had unconsciously signaled the blonde or if he just acted on his own. But at the moment he said those words, Naruto placed his right hand on the palantir. The stone flared up into a bright light as Sauron felt the other man bearing the sliver of the Vala's power look upon him. "My brother rides by me," Sasuke continued. As he spoke, another voice layered itself onto his, a deeper, richer voice that he knew belonged to the man who fought in that battle. "We are the sons of Otsutsuki Hagoromo, son of Otsutsuki Kagaya, also known as Burial, daughter of Melkor, and we do not fear you. Now be gone. Trouble us no more until we come to end your miserable existence." The palantir went dark and silent. For a long second all eyes stared at it. Then Naruto was the first to break the silence. "Kami, Sasuke, here I thought I was the melodramatic one," he said in perfect usage of the common tongue. "You have changed." "Naruto, how are you able to speak the common tongue?" Sasuke asked his friend. "You don't even know it." "I don't know," he said with a shrug of his shoulders. But then he smiled. "It'll sure make understanding everyone a lot easier though." Chapter 31, Differences and Similarities. Location, Minas Tirith. "So, how is it that you know the language of this land, Naruto?" Shikamaru asked from where he sat at the table. In his younger days, he might have leaned back against the wall with his hands behind his head, but he was older now and sat properly in his chair, looking at the man he followed. Hell if I know, Shikamaru, Naruto replied as he shrugged his shoulders, sitting at the head of the table. They were sitting in a tavern that would have been empty without them, giving them some privacy. Yugo and Izuna stood outside, keeping guard. The only person who was inside the place aside from the shinobi was the tavern keeper, and he was only there because they were. Before the incident with the Palantir, Aragorn and Ymir had sent orders to what remained of the Rohirrim and Gondor forces to be ready the next day to head out to Mordor. Seeing that there was nothing they could do now that the injured in the houses of healing had been tended to and the soldiers of the city had taken over the watch, the shinobi took the time to rest and talk amongst themselves. Silently, they acknowledged that it was a chance to catch up with Sasuke. But right now, the main concern was how the Hokage could speak the common tongue. Ugh, troublesome blonde, the Nara amongst them grumbled. Naruto just grinned. That's no way to talk to your Hokage, he said in reply. Yes, it is most unyouthful, Lee agreed loudly. Thank you, Lee. You took me on as an advisor because you knew I didn't take any crap, Shikamaru reminded Naruto. Yes, and that you would actually help me run the village. Then help me out here and give me some information I can process and go over in my head. Honestly, Shikamaru, I don't know how I know the language. It just came to me after I put my head on that stone I told you about. Right after Sasuke was holding it, correct? He asked while focusing his eyes on Sasuke. Yep, the blonde answered. Are you thinking that he somehow transferred the language? That's exactly what I'm thinking. How would he do that? Kiba asked. First, we'd have to know about the stone itself. His eyes traveled over to where Sasuke sat at Naruto's right. What is it? I don't know much about it, he replied. It's more than we know. He could see the point there. Apparently, it was part of a set that enabled the users of separate stones to communicate at long distances. Wait, there was more than one? Tenten asked him. At one time, there were 7. But 4 were lost over the years, some of which have fallen into the hands of the enemy. They went from being an advantage to a liability. Damn. Tenten? Said Lee, looking a little nervously at his teammate. You have that unyouthful gleam in your eyes again. What was that, Lee? Did you say something? She asked him with a smile that just screamed danger. Fortunately for him, his rescue came in the form of Sasuke. I should mention that they are considered a national treasure. Even considering taking one is a crime punishable by death. I know it's been 10 years, but even you must realize that sounds like a challenge to her, Choji remarked as he drank the ale in his tankard. Tenten, we are guests here, Naruto reminded the kunoichi with a firm tone in his voice. I expect you to behave as such. Yeah, I get it, she replied. The gleam disappeared from her eyes, but Sasuke made a mental note to warn Aragorn about her. So, what do you think happened, Shikamaru? Ino asked her teammate, looking at him. It's most likely that the two of them subconsciously communicated with one another as they held the stone, he replied. Sasuke probably thought that Naruto would need information about the land we're in and started him off with the language. So, would it work with any of us? Ino wondered aloud. I doubt it, Sasuke answered her. And even if it did work, I would recommend against it. We're not the only ones with a stone. Still, it works out in the end, Sakura remarked. Now we have 2 translators instead of 1. We won't have to stay in one group to understand people. And if you two can start teaching the language, it will make things even easier, she said to both Naruto and Sasuke. Good point, the blonde of the two conceded. I guess I'll start with Shikamaru then. Hey, why him? Said Kiba in slight protest. You mean besides the obvious? He asked, his tankard halfway to his lips as he spoke. Let's be honest, Kiba. Out of the two of you, I think that Akamaru would get the language faster than you would. He brought the tankard the rest of the way up and drank from it. I don't see how that would be possibly since that's not Akamaru beside him, Sasuke remarked quietly, looking at the dog beside the Inuzuka. It wasn't meant to be a secret because Kiba just snorted in laughter. Of course this isn't Akamaru, he replied, placing a comforting hand on the dog. This is his son, Aoimaru. After looking at the dog again, the uchiha could see some similarities proved what he said. There was just one question left. Why didn't you bring Akamaru? He's an old dog, Sasuke. If you had been in the nations, he would have come. But I was worried he wouldn't make the voyage here. Have you spent all these years on this continent? Sakura asked him. Yeah, he answered. I took the first available ship I found, and it took me here. I tried to stay away from seaports as much as I could, only go to them when I had no other options. I never thought you were afraid of the sea, Shino remarked quietly. But he heard him. I'm not. I just wasn't going to take any chances of being found out. I didn't know if the nations knew of this continent. If they did, I wasn't going to risk the chance of being found out and taken back. Well, we didn't know about it, Choji told him. You're not the only shinobi village. For all I knew, Kumo or Kiri knew about it, and were just one sighting away from sending A and B units after me. You don't think very highly of their attitude about you, do you? Naruto remarked. He gave the blonde a look. After the things I've done, and what they might do to me, would you? For a moment, all anyone heard the sound of the fire behind Naruto's back crackle and snap in its pit. The Konoha 11 waited for their leader to say something in reply. At first, he just raised the tankard in his hand to his lips and drank from it. Gah, this stuff is bitter, he complained as he put the tankard down. Why am I drinking it again? Because you ordered it, Sai reminded him. Oh, right. He put the tankard down and pushed it away slightly. Ease up, Naruto, Kiba said before taking a swig from his own. It's not that bad. I'll leave that up to our resident food expert. He looked pointedly at Choji as he spoke. The Akimichi chose not to comment on that, even though the Hokage was looking right at him. After a minute of silence, Naruto gave up and turned his head back to Sasuke. So, what have you been doing? Just now? He asked with slight sarcasm. Just sitting here and talking with you. That's not what I meant. What have you been doing for the past 10 years? Nothing much, he answered after a pause. I just went from one place to another, wandering around. Then why has that one blonde guy with the pointed ears keep calling you Crabender? Ino asked him. His name is Legolas, and he's an elf. I told you this already, he said to the Yamanaka. Yes, I know you told who and what he is, but that's not what I'm talking about and you know it. Why does he keep calling you that word? Even though she had no idea what the language was speaking, she could tell that he referred to Sasuke like that by always starting off with that word in greeting. It's just a name they gave me. It's Sindarin for raven, roughly. Gave you? Hinata repeated. Sindarin? Said Shikamaru with a questioning tone in his voice. Yes, gave, he told the Hyuga amongst them. I'm not Naruto. I didn't go announcing my identity everywhere I went. Hey, I'm right here, you know, the aforementioned blonde said with a hurt look on his face. Sakura just laughed. That's why he said it. You did tend to do that, Naruto. He frowned at first, and then pouted. I thought you were supposed to be on my side. Those words just made her laugh again, something that almost sounded musical to Sasuke's ears. Hey, what's Sindarin? Tenen asked, repeating Shikamaru's earlier question. It's one of the Elvish languages, the most common one in any case, Sasuke answered her. I know some of it. It's not one we're going to have learn, is it? No, you won't. They weren't going to be here that long to learn it anyway. Why bother? I think that you're called more than just that title, Naruto remarked. I heard some people call you the bellman out on the streets. I take it you didn't tell people your name. He didn't answer the blonde, which prompted some of the others to look at him with the question on their faces. I had a hat with bells on it that jingled wherever I went. The children were the first to call me that name. Truth be told, he didn't like the name at first. It was annoying to hear those children come after him screaming Bellman. Bellman! All the time. Then he grew to not care about it. It was only a name after all. Let them call him what they wanted. Orcs used to fear the sound of those bells jingling. Orcs, Hinata said, repeating the word and hearing it on her own tongue. Were those the creatures that we fought and killed? He nodded. They're a plague on these lands that never seem to go away. If you see an orc, kill it. I'd be willing to bet that the orcs had a name for you too, Choji remarked. You'd win that bet. There was a brief victorious smirk on his face at that news. Nice. So, what was it? Blood eyes, he answered shortly. Ha! Kiba barked. Not very imaginative, are they? Orcs aren't known for their intelligence. In fact, I'm pretty sure it's discouraged. He could be wrong, but every orc he seemed to meet was dumber than the last one. You know, I heard something interesting in the streets, Naruto said as he looked at his friend. Something about the bellman going from the savior of children to the defender of the city. You and kid Sasuke? He remarked with a grin. Are you holding something back from us? No, the raven-haired of the two replied. Really? The blonde asked. Yes. Then why are they calling you a savior of children? Because I used to save them, he answered like it was the most obvious thing in the world. But it just made everyone stare at him like he had grown a second head. You, the most antisocial guy in the academy? Said Kiba. You're going around saving kids? No need to sound so surprised. I'm sorry, but it's you. Kiba, how many times have I asked you to stop stating the obvious? Shikamaru asked him with a tone that was both annoyed and patient at the same time. Come on, Shikamaru. It's him, for crying out loud. He gestured with both hands at Sasuke, emphasizing his point. We get it already, Kiba, Hinata said quietly from beside him. Why would you do something like that? Sakura asked Sasuke. Because I could, he replied, perhaps a little harsher than intended. Orcs were taking kids away from their homes and their families to do Kami knows what to them. There is no real force that would be able to track them down in the right time. Why shouldn't I have done something to save them and bring them back to their families? They didn't say anything in reply, knowing full well that he had a point. He had lost his family and suffered for it. They could understand how he felt that no other child should have to go through that ordeal. Such an act of selflessness would no doubt make the parents try to reward him. But some of them knew him well enough to know that he probably would have refused and didn't stay around once the children were back home safe. While others might call that rude, they knew it was him being him. So they didn't call him out on it. Speaking of children, there is a question that we have all been wondering about for some time now, Naruto said, a serious tone in his voice and a serious look on his face. That kid standing outside this place with Yugo, is he really Madara's son? Why are you asking that? Sasuke asked back, instantly becoming on guard for his student. You know why. Is he Madara's son? The Uchiha amongst understood what the Hokage was saying when he repeated the question a second time. He was asking if Izuna shared Madara's ideals. No, in that sense he isn't. As far I know, Madara only saw him once as a child. He was raised by his mother's people in the woods of Lothlorien. And besides, the elves would have a problem with you if you were planning on killing him. And why's that? Shikamaru asked. He's the grandson of their last High King. All his personal information sounds like the beginning of a story, he remarked dryly. Sasuke would have snorted in contained laughter if he was the sort of person to do that. But instead, he stayed silent. How much have you taught him? Naruto asked, his seriousness turning into curiosity. Not as much as I would like. But hopefully, if we both manage to survive this, I'll be able to teach him more. The blonde smiled. I hope so too. I want to see how much the student of my friend can do. The same here, Sakura said with a smile as well, pointing it right at Sasuke. For some odd reason, he couldn't help but stare at her when she smiled. There was something about it that wanted to make him smile too. A strange feeling bloomed in his chest at the sight, and it concerned him. There was something going on between Sakura and Naruto, something he figured from their words and actions, but he wanted to confirm it. So you two are together, he commented, looking at them both. While the others, with the exception of Shikamaru, were surprised by his words, they weren't. Kami, Sasuke, how'd you figure it out? Naruto asked him, not embarrassed at all at being found out. She said something about children while chastising you about Kakashi's habits, he remarked, glancing over at Sakura. They both shared a look at those words. It was a brief one, and then they turned back to look at him. We are parents, the blonde of the two answered. They are triplets, 1 boy and 2 girls. And they drive me crazy. But he said it with a smile. Congratulations, he said in reply, despite feeling his stomach twisting into an unhappy knot. I'm sorry I missed the wedding. That's not a problem, considering that we aren't married. If he had been drinking, he might have done a spit take. Instead, he went for a surprised look on his face. His eyes swung back and forth between the two of them. You have kids and you're not married? Sakura smirked. When did you become old-fashioned, Sasuke? She asked him. You know full well that there are many couples in the village who have kids and aren't married. It was true, but he had been raised in a clan and he was taught that you could only have children with a woman when you married her. Infidelity was not tolerated in the Uchiha clan. But his two friends were not part of a clan, not unless there were more Uzumaki survivors he wasn't aware of. So he didn't press them on that. Instead, he asked the obvious question. How'd it start? The rest of the Konoha 11 was resigned to hear the story again, having asked the question and heard the story themselves, but Naruto and Sakura were happy to tell it. Well, let me tell ya, it wasn't easy, Naruto told him. I spent at least a year begging on my knees after the war, trying to get her on a date. Finally, just to get him to stop, I said yes to one date, Sakura continued. After that, I agreed to another, and then another, and then another, until finally we ended up living together. He didn't try to seduce me nor did he take me out for ramen every time. He actually took me out to dinner and escorted me home like a perfect gentleman. And I still resent the fact that you acted surprised at the fact that I could, her boyfriend told her. You're you, Naruto. What else would I have expected? In her defense, we were expecting the same thing, Shikamaru said. Is that why you lot stalked us on the second date? We had to see it for our own eyes, Ino said in protest. And we were really annoyed with you two when you decided to flee through the window. How else were we supposed to get away from you? Sakura asked her friend. Guys, aren't you misleading Sasuke? Sai asked the Hokage and his girlfriend. Confusion raged on in his head at the question, but Sasuke kept it off his face. He's right, Shikamaru agreed. You two are engaged and are in the midst of planning your wedding. Oh yeah, whoops, Naruto said with a sheepish expression on his face. I forgot about that. Why would you come here if you were in the middle of planning a wedding? Sasuke asked him. This time around, he didn't look so sheepish. Because someone called out for help and we all answered. They spent the remainder of the time in the tavern talking about trivial things. But they soon realized the fact that they need to get some sleep and went their separate ways. Even though he technically shared an apartment with Gandalf and Pippin, the Hobbit was spending one last night in the Houses of Healing, and he had no idea where the wizard went off to. He lay there, trying to go to sleep but with no success. His mind was too busy racing around with thoughts. Maybe he shouldn't have asked to see a picture of the triplets, but he couldn't deny the fact that he was curious to see them. Naruto was all too happy to show a picture of them that was taken at their third birthday. They were chubby in the way only toddlers could be but had happy expressions on their faces with big smiles too that he knew they got from Naruto. The boy Haru was the only blonde amongst them while his sisters were redheads. But while Hikari was a true redhead, her sister, Hataru, had a pinkish tinge to her hair. And despite what kind of hair color they all had their father's eyes. As he had stared at the picture, he couldn't help but imagine them with black hair and dark eyes. That image was quickly banished from his mind but it stuck around and he couldn't help but feel ashamed. He shouldn't be doing that. Sakura was with Naruto now, not with him. He had his chance and he blew it big time. He knew that but still he stayed awake, thoughts that he shouldn't be thinking of plaguing him. What would have happened if he had stayed instead of left? Would Sakura have still wanted to go out with him? Would he have married her? Would those children be his instead of Naruto's? Stop it, he told himself, turning over in his bed. You had your chance, Sasuke. You were too focused on Itachi to see it. She's with Naruto now. You should be happy. And while he was, there was still some jealousy inside him. He kept seeing her face, her smile, even when he closed his eyes. The door to the room creaked open, making him go still and becoming alert. Slowly, he reached for the kunai he had stashed, taking hold of the handle. Only when the creaking stopped did he turn around with the kunai in hand, ready to attack. But as soon as he saw who was at the door, he stopped himself and lowered the kunai. "What do you need, Sakura?" he asked his former teammate, taking notice that she was only wearing a robe. She closed the door and locked it before looking back at him. She started to walk towards him, her hands reaching for the belt holding the robe. With a simple of her shoulder, she sent it to the ground in a heap. When she reached him, she leaned forward and kissed him. He did not push her away when he felt her lips on his. She kissed him with enough passion to push him back against the bed, making them both fall down. He landed on the bed, and she braced herself from crashing into him by placing her hands on both sides of his head. They stared at one another, not saying anything at first. She hovered over him, placing her own knees between his legs to prevent him from getting free. In the position he was in, he saw everything, and as much as he wanted to believe that he didn't want it, he was aroused by the sight of her naked. "We shouldn't do this," he told her. She didn't say anything in reply. "You're engaged." "I know," she replied. "You have children." "I know." The light from the moon shined through the window and onto her, turning her skin pale and illuminating. He knew that she had become beautiful since he had seen her last, but now the fact struck him full in the face. She was beautiful, she was naked, and she was above him with intent so clear that even the stupidest person in the world would have gotten it. She leaned down and kissed him again with the same passion, this time bringing in her tongue to pry open his mouth. He responded to it just as passionately while reaching up to her hips with his hands. With a quick flip, he reversed their positions, pinning her to the bed with him above her. Then, he descended. The next morning, the courtyard before the gate was filled with what remained of the Rohirrim and the soldiers of Minas Tirith. They were doing a last check to make sure their weapons were honed and sharp, their armor strong and maintained, their supplies maintained, and their horses readied. Izuna was garbed in his grandfather's armor once more, sitting atop his horse. "Thank you, Grima," he said to Wormtongue, who handed him Aglos. "Will I be joining you as you leave for battle, my lord?" the man asked, not daring to look the half-elf in the eye. "No, I want you to stay in the city, help however you can." He bowed in acknowledgement, and walked away, careful to avoid attracting the gaze of any Rohirrim. Izuna watched him go. He had Grima been doing things that would not occupy him for the long term. If they were successful in this gamble and they won the war, he would need something, and the half-elf didn't know what it was. "Thinking deep thoughts, young Izuna?" Gandalf asked from atop Shadowfax with Pippin riding with him. The half-elf didn't say anything, only kept watching Grima walk away. The wizard saw who he was looking at and said nothing. It was not his place to do so. Sasuke sat on a borrowed horse near the broken gate, waiting in silence as the men mounted and readied themselves. After what happened last night, he had awoken to find himself alone in the bed. Romantics might have wondered if it had been a dream, but he knew it wasn't. It was also why he took great pains to avoid the Konoha 11 since he got out of the bed. He was not going to cause problems with them with what he and Sakura did. It was a mistake, plain and simple. But he also knew, given Naruto, that if he spoke about it, it was most likely going to come to a fight, and they didn't need it. They had to focus on the suicide tactic. "Are you ready?" Aragorn asked him, coming up to his side on Brego. For once, the ranger had foregone his normal clothes and cloak. Instead, he had dressed in chain mail with a surcoat over it, and a long cloak of black on the top and red under the bottom. His arms were protected by Boromir's vambraces, and his shoulders were protected with plates of steel. Emblazoned on the surcoat was the symbol of Gondor, the white tree. And Duro hung around his waist. He did not look like a ranger at that moment. He looked like a king. "Are you?" Sasuke asked back. He was clad in the mithril armor, and the katana was belted to his waist. A quick glance over at the shinobi told him that they were clad in the clothes they came in. "Yes." "Then so am I." He looked at the men there in the courtyard and saw that they were ready and waiting. Hugo was nearby on foot, having refused a horse. So was Legolas, who rode with Gimli in tow. Merry rode Eomer and Pippin with Gandalf. Aragorn saw the same thing he saw and nodded his head in silent acknowledgement. It was time to go. He moved Brego to the gate. "Men of Gondor and men of Rohan," he called out, getting their attention. If anyone had noticed the fact that he didn't say anything about the shinobi, They didn't say anything. We ride. He turned his horse around and rode out the gate. The fellowship followed him, Izuna riding by his side. Yugo walked alongside Sasuke, as always keeping a protective eye out for him. Behind the fellowship but ahead of the soldiers rode the Konoha 11. Together, they all rode to one last battle. Chapter 32, One Last Round. Location: Black Gate. When the gate came into sight as they marched on, the backs of every soldier there stiffened slightly. They had reached their destination. Even when most of their horses did not want to continue, they dismounted and kept on marching. Now came the time to do battle with the hordes of Mordor. They had marched for days on end with nothing but what lay before them in sight. But as they came to a stop before the gate and took in the menacing sight of it, all black iron and tall spikes, they also saw that there was no one, not even a single orc, was there waiting for them. "Where are they?" Pippin asked quietly from where he sat on Shadowfax. It was a question that he wasn't alone in wondering. After what he had seen in the Palantir, Sauron must have known that they were coming and would have promptly prepared for them. But there was nothing. They had marched all that distance to see nothing but intimidating gate. While some men would have just given up at that moment, Aragorn was not such a person. He urged Brego forward to the gate, while also signaling the fellowship, Ymir, and the banner carrier to ride with him. When they were but a few short feet away from the gate themselves, they came to a stop. "Let the Lord of the Black Land come forth!" The King of Gondor shouted up to them. "Let justice be done upon him!" At first, there was no response from beyond the Black Gate. The silence dragged on while they still stared up at the gate. It was only when they started looking at one another that they felt that things were beginning to feel a little awkward. They were getting no reply and they sat there on their horses looking like a group of idiots. But then the sounds of gears turning and metal groaning began to be heard. The Black Gate was opening. They had been heard. The gate opened just enough to let one person ride through. From the other side, one person did atop a horse that was more skeletal than flesh. As they watched him come through, the fellowship and Ymir realized that person might have been stretching it for a description. He was cloaked in black robes and armor, his head hidden beneath a giant helmet inscribed words of a black language, blocking everything but his mouth, which was not something to be proud of. "My master Sauron the Great bids thee welcome," the creature spoke in a deep voice that vibrated with an evil taint that made them wince as they listened to it. Its mouth was twice as large as it should have been. The teeth inside the mouth were large and rotted to a state of decay that it was a miracle they were still in. But the worst part was the flesh scars around the mouth that moved and opened whenever he spoke. They all stared at him with horror and disgust on their faces, Sasuke less so than the others. He had faced off against Orochimaru, Madara, and Kagaya. This guy had nothing on them. "Is there any in this rout with authority to treat with me?" he asked them all, a derisive and mocking tone evident in his voice. "We do not come to treat with Sauron, faithless and accursed," Gandalf snapped at him, making him growl and bare his teeth. "Tell your master this. The armies of Mordor must disband. He is to depart these lands, never to return." "Aha! Old Greybeard," he said with an amused laugh, making the wizard unsure. "I have a token I was bidden to show thee." He reached into his robe and pulled out a mithril shirt, easily the size a hobbit could wear. The fellowship bit back a breath at the sight of the shirt. "Frodo," said Pippin. The servant of Sauron threw the shirt at the wizard, forcing him to catch it. It seemed like the shirt crumpled in his grip, like there was no more life to it. "Frodo," said Pippin again, only louder, making the servant growl and grin savagely. "Silence," ordered Gandalf. "No!" Merry cried, making the servant grin wider, exposing more of his rotten teeth. "Silence," said the white wizard again, but to no avail. Grief was evident on the faces of the fellowship at the sight of the shirt. "The halfling was dear to the eye, the servant remarked. If they could see his eyes, they might have seen a cruel gleam in them. Know that he suffered greatly at the hands of his host. Who would have thought one so small could endure so much pain? And he did, Gandalf, he did?" His savage grin was still there as he looked over at Izuna. "Ah, the seed of Gil-galad has come. My master had bidden me to tell thee that your mother has been a most stubborn guest in Minas Morgul, forcing her to be corrected and chastised many times. Her corrections and chastisements were not gentle. The half-elf began to tremble in his saddle and tried to keep his emotions under tight guard. Do thou not care for the woman who birthed thee? I shall convey thy feelings to her, for I have known her to call for thee or thy father, the servant told him. Izuna's grasp on his emotions slipped, and tears formed in his eyes, making the servant grin savagely again. Perhaps I was mistaken in my belief after all. Thou do care after all. My master also wishes to know if thee have used the gift he had deigned to give you in the land of Kalinardhorn. A furious look emerged upon Izuna's face, his eyes morphing into the Mangekyo Sharingan, making the servant smile again. He raised Aglos up to strike the servant, only to have Sasuke reach out and grab hold of the shaft. Now isn't the time, he told his student. Calm down. Izuna looked at him, the fury and sadness shining in his eyes. Calm down, he repeated. Slowly, Izuna lowered the glaive and deactivated his eyes, letting the red and black fade away. The smile on the servant's mouth vanished into an irritable look. Sauron the Great has seen thee as much as thou hast seen him, worm. He wonders why thee did not put thy home to the sword as thou had promised thyself so many years ago. He did not say a word, already knowing the answer to that question. In that silence, Aragorn had Brego move forward. The servant swung his helmeted head to look at him, if he could. And who is this? Isildur's heir? He asked derisively. It takes more to make a king than a broken elvish blade. Whatever he would have said next was lost when the aforementioned king rode up beside him, drew his blade, and lopped off his head with one stroke. The head flopped into the air and then fell to the ground with a thud that could barely be heard. I guess that concludes negotiations, Gimli remarked. Aragorn turned to face the others. Looking them all in the eyes, I do not believe it, he told them, speaking of Frodo's fate. I will not. Meanwhile, Izuna dismounted his horse and moved towards the head, his grip on Aglos so tight he might cause the skin to break open and bleed. With a savage thrust, he mounted the head onto the blade. He lifted it up so the head was facing the black gate. You want me that bad? I'm right here, he shouted out. Don't send someone to do what you want. He swung the head up and off the blade, sending it skyward. He clasped his hands together and began flashing through the necessary hand seals. Katon, Gokakyu no Jutsu! He cried, breathing a fireball up at the head, burning it to ashes that floated away on the wind, past the gate. As in response, the black gate opened. It was a slow process, but the crack that was already there grew wider. Beyond it, the Fellowship could see orcs marching towards them. There seemed to be no end to them as they kept marching in tight uniformed lines. Pull back! Aragorn commanded, turning Brego around. Pull back! Izuna quickly got back on his horse and together, they all rode back to their men. The gate was now wide open and the orcs marched through, looking large and larger by the second. The soldiers that had come with them saw the approaching army, and began to slowly back away in fear of the sight. They could see the numbers that were coming towards them, but they did not expect that many, and it didn't help that there was more behind that. They were literally pouring out of the gate and around them all, entrapping them and ensuring that there was nowhere left to go. Hold your ground! Aragorn shouted to them all as he and the others rode up. Hold your ground! He had Brego stop before the army and began trotting before the front line. Sons of Gondor, of Rohan, my brothers, he began addressing them. I see it in your eyes, the same fear that would take the heart of me. A day may come when the courage of men fails, when we forsake our friends and break all bonds of fellowship. But it is not this day. An hour of wolves and shattered shields when the age of men comes crashing down, but it is not this day. This day we fight. He paused for a moment, making Brego come to a halt. By all that you hold dear on this good earth, I bid you stand. Men of the West! He cried, raising Andúril above his head. His words made them put the fear away and the steel back in their spines, making them all stand taller and draw their swords. The Konoha shinobi couldn't hear the words Aragorn was using in his speech, aside from Naruto, but they could tell that he was saying a speech. When they saw the swords being drawn, they shifted their balances, readying themselves for the fight. I take it that was the pump-up speech? Naruto asked Sasuke. He and Izuna were right next to the shinobi, still in the saddle. Yeah, he answered. And that little ride to the gate was the pre-battle trash talk. Yep, he replied. The blonde looked over at Izuna. Not bad for a threat, kid. I could really hear the emotion in your voice, he told him. Thank you, I think, Izuna replied. He wasn't exactly sure that what he did was something that should be praised. He cast a look at his sensei, but he was staring straight ahead at the oncoming orcs. Then all of a sudden, he began to dismount. Surprised by the action, his student nonetheless followed his actions. Sensei, why are we dismounting? He asked. They're about to surround us, Sasuke answered, looking at the orcs as they split down the middle and began going around them. If the horses are caught, they'll cause a panic and wreak more damage on us than they will to the orcs. He turned his attention over to Gandalf, who had heard what he said. You should tell Shadowfax to lead them away before they get caught. The wizard didn't say anything in reply, only nodded and dismounted, bringing Pippin down with him. The others on horseback dismounted, following his example. Gandalf whispered into Shadowfax's ear. The Lord of the Horses listened and neighed once before turning around and moving through the soldiers. The horses followed him at a trot, but once they were through the soldiers, they broke out into a gallop, reaching freedom just before the orcs cut off the men of the west. To the Rohirrim who saw the horses get away, their hearts were glad. Gimli looked at the orcs before and around him. He was probably in the battle that might end his life, and yet, there was only a single thought on his mind, one that seemed inconsequential after all he had been through. But old habits and grudges died hard. Never thought I'd die fighting side by side with an elf, he remarked. What about side by side with a friend? Legolas asked the dwarf, looking down at him with a smile on his face. I could do that, he answered in agreement. Sasuke saw that the orcs had stopped moving and were waiting in place. The black gate was wide open now, letting them all see into Mordor. What they saw was obscured by the orcs, letting only the dark clouds and the Tower of Barad-dûr be shown. There was an orange light shining from the tower, and he had no doubt that was Sauron. Do you feel safe there? He silently asked the creature they had come to distract. He didn't get an answer, and he wasn't expecting one. Yugo, he said to his friend, who stood behind him. Yes? Yugo replied, looking at him. Do you think that if you go all out, you will be able to restrain yourself enough to attack the orcs? I don't know. He had always gone into a berserker state when he went all out, and never gave a damn about whom or what he killed so long as he killed. That won't be good enough, Yugo. You, I, and the rest of the men here will need a straight answer. If you focus on the orcs, will you be able to kill only them? He did not answer for a long moment. I will try. In the end, that was all he could do. He could try and restrain himself. Thank you, Sasuke told him. Look on the bright side, Yugo, Naruto said, standing on Sasuke's right. What's the bright side? The orange-haired monster asked. There appear to be a lot more of them than there are us. So there's good chance that if you do lose control, you won't kill any men. That's not much of a bright side. Hey, it's better than nothing. Naruto, could you please focus on what's right in front of us? Shikamaru asked him with a voice that was bored, annoyed, and concerned all at the same time. They're just standing there, Shikamaru. There's really nothing can do about that. Naruto, focus please, Sakura told him in a gentle reprimanding voice. He did as he was told and turned his attention back to the orcs, a serious expression taking its place on his face. His hands fell to his sides, folding themselves into fists. For a moment there was silence. Then he spoke again. Hey, Sasuke? He said to his friend. What? Crabbender said back. When this is all over, you're coming back home with us. Someone else might have told the blonde that he had poor timing. But Sasuke knew him and knew that he did it on purpose. If you're deliberately trying to piss off the other Kages, I'd say you're off to a great start, he remarked with enough sarcasm to make it obvious. I'm not doing that, and you're still coming home. And why is that? So Konoha can once again have the uchiha in their grasp? He was sure that the elders would just love that. Nope, his friend replied. Then why? For a very simple reason. I want you to be the best man at mine and Sakura's wedding." If he wasn't already standing still, he might have froze in place at those words. They repeated themselves again and again inside his head. "You're joking," he finally said. "No, I'm not." "Then you've gone insane." Now that was rude. You've got the entirety of the Konoha 11 to choose from. You've got Kakashi, you've got Konohamaru, and you've even got Gaara or Killer Bee. I know that. I was still trying to decide between those last two before we came here. Then in the name of the Vala do you want me, a time bomb just waiting to explode on the piece you have undoubtedly created since I left, to be the best man? He rolled his eyes. And you called me a daube. I want you to be the best man because you're my best friend and the brother I never had. The words wormed their way into his heart, and he felt honored by them as well as touched. Really, he was. But that still didn't change the fact that there was a good chance he could start the next Shinobi World War just by going back. It's still a bad idea. Sasuke, it's decided, Sakura told him, quiet but firm. When she said those 3 words, he found that he had nothing else left to convince them with. If they lived through this and they were adamant about it, he could probably sneak away from them and escape into the wilds. But there was the matter of Izuna. Aragorn suddenly stepped forward to the orcs, almost as if he was in a trance. He lowered Enduro and looked like he was going to give up. But then he turned to look at the army standing there, at his friends and his allies. "For Frodo," he whispered to them. Then he raised his sword and charged towards the orcs standing before the Black Gate. "There goes the king," Shikamaru commented. Then Merry and Pippin screamed a war cry and followed their friend towards battle with swords drawn. "There go the hobbits." Finally, as if snapped out of their state of silence by the sight, the men of the West, plus 1 elf, dwarf, wizard, and half-elf, roared their own war cry and followed their king. "There goes the army. And here go the shinobi!" Naruto exclaimed. "Charge!" he cried in a loud voice. "Let us go forth with the power of youth!" Lee cried as he led the charge. "We're not young anymore, Lee!" Tenten reminded her teammate as she followed. "I refuse to believe that. You are as young as you believe you are." They never change, Sasuke thought to himself. But he found himself running at their side, a dangerous smile coming onto his lips, his hand reaching for the katana at his side. His blood began to burn with the urge to see those who stood before him utterly crushed beneath his feet. Like a wave that rapidly gaining momentum, the men of the West charged at the massive horde of orcs surrounding them. They let out war cries like wargs baying for blood. They knew that what they were doing was a suicide tactic. They were throwing their lives away just so they could give Frodo extra time to reach his destination. But if anything, that just made them run towards death even faster, with their hearts pounding out the only drum beat they would ever need at that moment, and with their blood singing the only song they needed to hear. Even Gandalf, who wasn't even mortal let alone a man, felt those same things, and he shouted his defiance just like the rest of them. Even as they were passed by the bigger folk, Merry and Pippin never stopped running or screaming. But the 2 who led the charge, the 2 who were out in the front, were Aragorn and Izuna. The half-elf had charged first like the king had, but he caught to him all the same. They ran towards the orcs, their hands holding their weapons. "Elendil!" roared Aragorn, and Duo raised high. "Gil-galad!" bellowed Izuna in response, holding Aglos low. Together, they struck the orc line as one, the sword swing high and the glaive thrusting low. The orcs they struck fell with a single slice. As they began to fight, the men of the West followed with them into the horde. They smashed against the endless orcs like a wave against a rock, pushing against one another to reach the orcs. But as they crashed against the orcs like a wave, the orcs closed in around, springing the obvious trap. Those behind them came forward, intent on crushing them like an egg. Sasuke was slicing orcs down left and right while making sure that nothing escaped his sight. The army was keeping itself together in the giant circle. They would let orcs fight their way in, but would not allow any man to fight their way out. The only problem with that was there were more orcs than there were men. But in spite of that, he kept killing the orcs. Overhead, a hail of kunai fell on a group of the monsters, killed them instantly, and letting him know that Tenten was there doing what she did best. A company of orcs was charging right at him. For a brief moment, he saw Lee by his side as he charged to meet them. As he blocked, deflected, knocked aside, and all but broke the weapons aimed at him before cutting the wielders down, he saw orcs flying through the air with broken limbs and snapped necks, showing that Lee was there. They meant about halfway through the company, he cutting them down and the Konoha shinobi beating them to bloody pieces. "Hello, Sasuke!" Lee shouted at him while delivering a punch that sent an orc's head flying off of its body. "I see you are doing well for yourself on this field of battle." "Less talking, Lee," he said shortly as he plunged the katana into an orc's groin and swung it upwards. Another orc tried to attack as the first body split into two, but all he did was simply lunge forward and stab the creature in the head. He pulled out the katana and gave the dead orc a hard kick. It was enough to send the corpse over to Lee, who kicked it hard at the next couple of orcs, knocking them all down. "Yosh!" he exclaimed. "That was excellent teamwork, Sasuke." The uchiha ignored him, choosing to fight his way out of the company and back into the battle. He found himself next to Gimli, and the two of them fought side by side. "That lad you were just with, Sasuke," the dwarf began. "I've never seen someone fight with their body like that. I know a few dwarves who would be green with envy at the sight." "That's ironic," he remarked as he beheaded an orc. "Why's that?" Gimli asked as he did the same to a different orc. "Lee used to wear a jumpsuit of bright green. If he used it right and caught you off guard, you would have been stunned by how green it was." The dwarf paused for a moment, seeing the image that had just been described to him. Then he shuddered and sliced off an orc's leg. "I can't believe I'm saying this, but I am glad the man wore black." "You and me both," Sasuke replied. Strangely enough, the memory of their first meeting came back to him at that moment. It made him smile for a moment, although it disappeared when another orc came at him, and he was forced back into the present, where he decapitated said orc. "Still, the lad is strong." "Aye, he is. Be glad that you never involved him in your game with Legolas, Gimli. Neither of you would have won." They both heard the sound of an arrow piercing an orc's skull, and they turned to see Legolas fighting his way towards them. Speaking of the elf, the dwarf muttered before calling out loudly, "How high are you?" 28, came the reply. "Ha! Then I am leading with 31. A smile came onto his lips briefly as he stabbed an orc with his knife. "Not for long, I promise you that." "You're welcome to try, elf," Gimli shouted at him while taking down two orcs with one swing. "Make that 33. If it was any other time, like at Helm's Deep or Minas Tirith, Sasuke might have rolled his eyes at their antics. But all he could do was keep focus on the fight and keep killing any orcs. They seemed to have no strategy, but with their numbers, they didn't really need one. All they had to do was rain down on their fewer opponents and hammer them until they were dust. "Gate na, Fong rotating Fong!" he heard Kiba shouted. The Inuzuka and his hound spun past him, carving bloody paths through the orcs. And while they killed some orcs, they also left the line and were alone. The orcs that weren't killed filled the paths and surrounded the two. "For the love of Kami," he heard Naruto groaned out loudly. "Hinata, please go and get your husband. He really needs to stop doing that." "Don't bother," he heard himself call out. "I'll get him. Izuna, with me," he told his student. The half-elf heard those words and began fighting his way to his sensei's side. Once he saw his student, Sasuke sheathed his katana and began folding his hands into seals. "Chidori," he growled out, activating the jutsu in his hand. He charged through the orcs, cutting a new path through them all as the jutsu cried into the air. Orcs fell to it, and Izuna kept the path open as they moved forward, away from their fellow soldiers and deeper into enemy territory. They quickly found Kiba and Aoimuro holding their own against the orcs. "Come on, let's go," Sasuke told the Inuzuka of the two while taking an orc and killing it with one kick to the chest. "Right, thanks," he said, already fighting to his side alongside Aoimuro. They quickly fought their way to Izuna, and together, the four of them fought their way out. "I had thought that you would have grown some in the past 10 years, Kiba. I guess that I was wrong." That got the Konoha shinobi angry. "Hey! We had it covered." "Of course you did. That's why the two of you were surrounded by orcs without a way out." "Sensei, that's happening all around us," Izuna told him whilst beheading an orc. There is no end to these orcs. That wasn't the only thing about these orcs. The ones that Sasuke had hunted and killed throughout the years had armor and weapons that had been scavenged off dead bodies and were poor condition. They had also lacked discipline and would cower at the sight of his Sharingan. The difference between those orcs and the ones they were fighting now was nothing minimal. They had discipline, for they did not cower at the sight of 2 pairs of Sharingan, let alone 1. They also had better weapons and armor, which were all in better condition. "We are not here to win, Izuna," he reminded his student as they continued to cut a way out. "We're here to stall and distract." As they reached their own line, they were met by Aragorn, Gandalf, Merry, and Pippin. The White Wizard smiled at the sight of them all, despite the situation they were in. "It is nice to see you take care of your friends, Crabbender," he said. Kiba's hand swooped down to his pouch and took out a shuriken. He threw it past Gandalf, slicing through the air right next to his ear, striking a Talish orc right behind the wizard in the eye. "Would you tell that old guy to watch himself?" the Inuzuka told Sasuke. Before the Uchiha could reply, the battle swept them apart and made them lose sight of the other. Sasuke was with Gandalf and the hobbits. Even though he had been separated from the Konoha shinobi, he still fought on, drawing the katana once again. The blade seemed to hum as it took in the violence all around them, and his blood seemed to agree. This was where they were meant to be, on the field of battle and nowhere else. For a brief moment, he saw Yugo in his complete berserk state, tearing through the orcs with gleeful joy. He wasn't sure if the man or the monster was in control, but at that point, he didn't care. He swung the blade at any orc who were foolish enough to meet him in battle, and as he fought, he made sure to keep an eye out on the hobbits. Both Merry and Pippin were holding their own without any aid from him or Gandalf. They had come a long way from Rivendell. "Hey Sasuke, what did that man tell you?" Pippin asked him. "He told me to tell Gandalf to watch himself," he answered honestly. The Took actually huffed. "Well, that's rather rude." Yes, he could be a bit more respectful to Gandalf, otherwise he wouldn't be able to see any of his fireworks. Merry agreed with him. "Okay, not as long as I had thought," the raven-haired Uchiha thought to himself. The White Wizard couldn't help but chuckle at their antics. Even in the midst of battle, they found a way to lighten the heart. A screech echoed through the air, making all the men turn their heads upwards at the sound. The Nazgul atop their flying mounts were descending down from the black gate, claws out and jaws opened. It looked like things were about to end badly when from out of nowhere, a giant eagle appeared and attacked the leading ringwraith. "The eagles," Sasuke heard Pippin say with wonder in his voice. "The eagles are coming." "What in the name of Kami is that supposed to mean?" the Uchiha asked himself. He got his answer when 5 more giant eagles flew down from the sky and bore down on the Nazgul, beating them all back with their wings, beaks, and talons. "The Vala have blessed us this day," Gandalf said with relief and hope in his voice. Then he turned his eyes onto Sasuke. "Or is it you that we should thank for calling them?" "I have no idea what you're talking about," he replied shortly before returning his attention to the battle around them. Even with the eagles pushing the Nazgul away, there was still a lot of orcs to deal with. As he plunged the katana into an orc's head, he realized that there was one way to neutralize those numbers and felt like an idiot for not realizing it sooner. But in hindsight, there was the added benefit of knowing he didn't think of it either. "Naruto!" he shouted over the din as he fought his way over to the blonde. "We're outnumbered here." "I noticed," the 7th Hokage shouted back at him, while killing orcs left and right with the kunai in his hands. The two of them quickly found themselves back to back, fending off the orcs all around them. "Well then, do something about it." "Like what?" "Really, Dobe?" he asked the blonde. "You're asking that question? What's the one jutsu you kept using every time when we were younger? I thought you grew a brain." "Oh, right." He crossed his fingers into a hand seal. "Tajukage Bunshin no Jutsu," he cried out before activating the jutsu and washing the area with smoke. Shouts of confusion came from the men of the West at the sight of the smoke, and they continued when the smoke disappeared and they saw multiple copies of the same blonde amongst them, enough to make an army. But before any of them could cry out witchcraft or foul sorcery, the copies let out a war cry and attacked the orcs on all sides. It was enough to give them a moment to catch their breath and regroup. The orcs were surprised by the attack of the blondes. They regrouped and attacked en masse. But these weren't any clones. They were clones of Naruto Uzumaki, who was unpredictable in battle at best and chaotic at worst. The clones attacked using everything they had in their arsenal, from kunai to jutsu, forcing the orcs back. Within a matter of minutes, the rear guard of the orcs surrounding the men of the west was broken. If they wanted to, they had a way out. But they weren't leaving, especially not when someone shouted, "Look out, trolls!" All heads swung to the dozen of trolls slogging their way through the orcs in a rough formation towards the small army. Unlike the trolls that had been at Minas Tirith, these trolls were properly armored and wielded giant swords like they knew how to use them. Unfortunately, either they nor Sauron anticipated the Konoha shinobi. "Shikamaru, Choji, Ino!" shouted Naruto in a voice that demanded attention and projected authority. "Sir!" the three shinobi replied instantly. "Take out the giants." He pointed at the leading troll. "Baika no jutsu, multi-size jutsu!" roared Choji as he grew to a size that easily rivaled the trolls, if not a little bit bigger. He leapt at the first one and knocked it down with one punch. Ino fell to the ground and one of the other trolls began attacking the others, catching them by surprise. Shikamaru kept watch over her body, using his clan's jutsu to attack any orc that came near. "By the Vala!" swore Aragorn at the sight of the three of them doing what they did best. "What wondrous powers your countrymen wield!" he said to Sasuke when he noticed that he was near. "I've noticed," he said shortly, keeping his back to Naruto and his focus on the fight. "I think we're doing rather well, don't you?" Naruto asked him. "In case you haven't noticed, Dobe, we're still outnumbered by a large margin," he replied, parrying a sword strike from an orc and caving in the chest of said orc with a kick. "And I'd be willing to bet that there are more coming, along with those armored trolls. So what you're saying is that unless we take care of them there, we'll be in a lot more trouble." He rolled his eyes. "Crude, but accurate," he conceded. "Well, why don't the two of us get in there and take care of it?" He kept on fighting even when he went still inwardly. "I hadn't thought of that." The blonde laughed. "Ha! See? I can think of an idea." "Shut up and let's get moving, Dobe." "Right," he said with a brief nod of his head. Then he turned that head to look at the nearby kunoichi. "Sakura, Sasuke and I are heading in past the gate and cleaning up from behind. Keep the others alive until we get back." "Okay," she shouted in return as she swung an orc around like a large flail. Together, the two of them turned to the gate and took off. Naruto leapt up into the air and came crashing down in his giant churka form. Sasuke, on the other hand, kept running through the orc lines, cutting his way through and activating his Susanoo. His own feet were soon replaced with the blue ones of the jutsu, crushing the orcs beneath and setting quite a few ablaze. Together, the giant fox and giant avatar ran through the seemingly endless horde of orcs and trolls, going right past the Black Gate and into Mordor proper. As they ran, they took notice of the land around them. It definitely lived up to its name, as it was all black, harsh, jagged land with no signs of green or even life. The fume from Mount Doom spawned an endless dark cloud that swallowed up any light that came from the sun. The only light that was shown was the harsh orange light from the Eye of Sauron, off in the distance. "You know, this would not be a place I would vacation in," Naruto called out to Sasuke. "That's why it's called Mordor," Sasuke called back. "It means the Black Land." "I can see that." They both came to a stop at a point where the Black Gate was far off in the distance. But they were still surrounded by orcs. It was as good a place as any, so they started doing what they did best together: mass destruction. The orcs never had a chance. As they wreaked their own personal brand of death on the armies of Sauron, they knew how the other fought, keeping an eye out for one another and staying out of the way, all the while making steady progress back towards the gate. It was like they had never split apart for 10 years. "Hey team, you missed one," the Hokage of the two called out. "I see him, Dobe," Sasuke replied as he swung the sword, cutting the orc and several others in halves. "They're taken care of." "Nice to see you haven't lost your touch," he said as he slammed his claws into the ground, crushing several orcs. "You know you're letting yours run free." "No, I'm not." Then why do I see them running away from you? He asked as he fired a black arrow into the army, sending a good deal up into flames. They're heading for the gate. That's not running. The blonde objected as he fired a bijadama into them. Of course, how could I not see it? He swung the sword down and carved out a bloody path amongst the horde. Hey, I can hear that sarcasm and it is not appreciated, the blonde shouted with a scowl on his face. Meanwhile, his tails were working in full force and swiping the orcs below. If you have time to hear the sarcasm, you're not doing enough fighting. Do try to stay focused, though. You're talking to me, Sasuke. Maybe you should stay focused. But even as they shouted at one another, there were small smiles on each of their faces. Things were beginning to sound like they used to. I'm not the one who has a short attention span, Sasuke said as he readied another black arrow. I do not have a short watch out. He shoved the fox hard against the avatar, enough to make him stumble away, and then moved out of the way of the descending mace. The weapon struck the ground with a resounding crack. It echoed in the air, like thunder after it was done booming. The ground itself was unsettled by the strike, breaking apart and sending many orcs down into the cracks to their obvious deaths. They both turned and saw a giant, black spiked armored being holding the mace. The helmet had grooves where the eyes were supposed to be, giving the illusion that the giant could see through it. The mace it was gripping tightly in its hand looked as equally dangerous, and both shinobi were probably very lucky that they weren't struck by it. Despite meeting him in person for the first time, Sasuke had seen enough pictures to know who it was. I see you got impatient, he said to Sauron. The Dark Lord didn't say anything in reply. Instead, he simply raised his mace and pointed it at the Uchiha. Suddenly, he felt an overwhelming force pushing itself against the Susanoo, making him a step back. He forced himself to make the avatar stand itself against the force. But it was exhausting. He had withstood many things in his life, but nothing like this. It was just pure force that was doing a very good job of overpowering him and pushing him back. But the force disappeared when the giant fox that Naruto commanded slammed into Sauron and bit the hand holding the mace. Sauron shook him off, sending him crashing to the ground, and swung the mace at him. Naruto moved out of the way fast enough, letting the weapon strike the ground with another resounding crack. The land split open again, sending more orcs into the depths. Sasuke went at the Dark Lord, swinging the sword to catch the mace before it could rise up again. The churka weapon met the mace with a sound that echoed into the distance, like far-off thunder. As they fought for control of the deadlock, the Uchiha noticed a faint orange light surrounded his opponent, and it was coming from the top of the Tower of Barad-dûr. So, it's a projection, he silently noted. But is it corporeal? To answer that question, he raised the other hand and punched the Dark Lord right in the face, or where the face would be. Sauron obviously didn't expect that move and was unprepared for it, stumbling back and almost falling to the ground. But he regained it gracefully and turned his attention to him. Sasuke, circle him! Naruto shouted at him. He instantly understood what the blonde was trying to suggest, and instantly went to his right, slashing at Sauron. If the Dark Lord could roar, he might have in that instance. Instead, he just turned and tried swinging at the Uchiha. When he turned, Naruto lashed out, clawing at his backside. The plan was simple: keep circling him and attacking him when he tried to attack the other. It wasn't a plan for an end move, rather it was so they could wear him out. But as they moved, attacked, and dodged his attacks, causing the earth crack every time, Sasuke had his doubts that it would not work. Still, he kept with it, moving and slashing at Sauron. Pretty soon, he was hopping over the cracks in the ground, due to how many there were now. There was also no more orcs underneath, as they had all either fallen or fled. He hoped that they had killed enough of them to make a difference at the Black Gate. As he ducked under a swing of the mace, he had moved back when he saw that the mace already coming back. He managed to avoid it, but was surprised by the move. Naruto swiped at Sauron's back, an attack that would have made him turn back around to fight the fox. But instead, he kept his attention on Sasuke, ignoring the wound. He was getting faster, tougher, and most likely stronger. He swung the mace again at Sasuke, trying to hit him. He swung the sword to meet the mace, having lost count of the many times they had done it in this three-way dance. But this time, it was different. The mace shattered the sword and took the arm with it. Sasuke was able to regenerate the arm and the sword in a matter of seconds, but his opponent used those seconds to swing the mace again and send crashing to the ground. Even though he was in the avatar of the Susanoo, he could feel the pain hitting his backside all the same, and it hurt like hell. He could see Sauron standing over him with the mace looking all the more deadly. "I see you," he heard a dark voice speak in his ear. It was a voice that sounded like there were nails piercing every inch of his skin. It made him want to claw off his ears as blood leaked out. Even though he wanted to do those things, he couldn't. "You are nothing. You are lower than the dirt beneath me. You dare to insult me when I could easily crush you? My ring will come back to me soon, and I will send you to your predecessors first. Be honored by that, and know that when I am done with you, I shall deal the spawn of your predecessor." Oh no, Sasuke thought. He found Frodo. Already he could hear the screeches of the ringwraiths coming closer as they flew away from the gate. If they found Frodo, it would be too late. Sauron raised his mace high, intent on delivering the final blow. He was so intent that he forgot about Naruto, and he paid the price. The seventh Hokage leapt up from behind and grabbed hold of him, throwing him against his own tower. "Sasuke!" shouted Naruto, holding out a giant paw. "Fuse with me." "There's no time," he shouted back as he got back onto his feet and readied another black arrow. "If the Nazgul find Frodo, we're done for." He began searching the air for them. "What the hell are Nazgul?" "Those riders on the flying creatures," he answered, already seeing one flapping hard for Mount Doom. He knocked the arrow and fired it, sending it right at the beast. It saw the arrow and flapped backwards to avoid it, putting more distance between it and the destination. "Shit, he's getting back up," Naruto swore. Sasuke looked out of the corner of his eye and saw that the blonde was talking about Sauron. The Dark Lord was indeed getting back up onto his feet and was staring in their general direction, more specifically at Sasuke. He began making his way towards them, his pace a general stride. "Can we take him?" Krabender muttered as he fired another arrow at the second ringwraith. "Naruto, keep him off my back while I keep these guys away from." "Oh sure, you get the easy job. Just do it, Dobe." "Fine," he said, turning to the giant enemy. He opened the jaws of the fox and fired off another Baijidama. It hurtled towards Sauron, but at the moment of contact, the Dark Lord swung his mace and sent it flying off into the distance. Sasuke, tell me you saw that." "Yeah, I did. Just keep him busy," Sasuke told him as he kept firing arrows at the ringwraiths. They were being kept back, but they were getting closer every time he knocked an arrow. "He's walking faster now." He could hear the pace getting faster, turning from a walk into a run. "Fire another Baijidama at him." "You really think that would work a second time?" the blonde asked rhetorically. They could both hear Sauron running, and a quick look showed Sasuke that he was almost on Naruto. But that look had cost him, and the Nazgul flew closer to Mount Doom. He fired more arrows at them, but they flew away from them all and converged on the volcano just as their master converged on his friend. He turned to help his friend, forgetting about the ringwraiths. His bow morphed into a sword and ran towards Sauron, who turned to greet him with mace held high. He didn't think he would survive this battle, let alone win it. But his friend needed his help and he would gladly give it. As they were about to come to blows, something miraculous truly happened. The giant form of Sauron disappeared, and so did the tiny figures of the ringwraiths, leaving their mounts flying in the air confused. Both Sasuke and Naruto were confused as well, until they heard a wail-like sound coming from Barad-dûr. They saw the eye of Sauron bulging out and flaring up, like it was trying to escape its bonds. For a brief moment, they thought that was going to happen. But then the tower itself began to fall. It was a sight that they would remember for the rest of their life. It just collapsed in on itself and fell to the earth below, taking the eye with it. The eye kept bulging and flaring more and more as it fell until it suddenly disappeared and then exploded into a massive shockwave that destroyed the rest of the tower. "Brace yourself!" Sasuke shouted at Naruto, even though he was already doing just that. He braced himself and waited for the shockwave to hit them. It hit them, and it was all they could do to keep a grip on their braces and not be sent flying through. But just as soon as it struck, it vanished. All that was left was the fact that the land of Mordor was self-destructing. And while that was comforting thought, one more worrying prevailed in Sasuke's mind. Frodo! Sam! He cried as he turned to Mount Doom, which erupting much more so than usual. Frodo must have succeeded in his quest and destroyed the ring. But now he and Sam would be trapped, unless he and Naruto saved. Without thinking about asking, he had the Susanoo leap into the air and onto the chakra fox. "Hey, I'm not a ride!" Naruto shouted in protest. "Not now, Naruto! Head for the volcano!" he ordered as he began to meld his jutsu with the Hokage's. Already, the avatar was disappearing and became armor for the fox, which would protect both of them from the destruction more than if they were separate. Why would I do that? The thing's erupting. My friends are there. They'll die if we leave them there. And he would not do that to those two hobbits, who risked everything, even their lives, to reach that mountain. Naruto gave a single look and then smiled widely. That's all I needed to hear. Now hang on. With a running start, the giant armored fox took off for the volcano, running faster than the destruction. Chapter 33, Many Endings and Beginnings. Location: Frodo. As he lay there in the comfortable darkness, he felt calm and relaxed. It was the first in several days that he felt like that. For too long he had been restless in his sleep, always worrying what he had carried ever since that night Gandalf back to the Shire, fearing that it would corrupt him. And in the end it did. In the heart of Mount Doom, when he had the chance to throw it away, he had taken the one ring for his own. If it wasn't Sam, he would have been lost to that accursed ring. But his dearest friend had been there to pull him out that darkness, telling to not let go. Together, the two of them fled the volcano as it erupted and self-destructed with the loss of the ring. It felt like they had barely made out of there before the place collapsed into lava. They had laid there on a bare patch of rock that was large enough to make the lava flow past it. The last thing Frodo had seen before falling into welcoming unconsciousness was a purple fox of titanic size reaching them and taking them both in its paws, with Sasuke and someone else inside it. And now, he was there in that darkness, feeling safe and comfortable even as he came out of unconsciousness. It felt like he was back at Bag End, in his own bed. There were birds singing in the air, and he could feel warm and gentle light on his face. He no longer felt tired and worn but refreshed. But he didn't know why he felt those things. I must wake up, he thought to himself. His first attempt to open his eyes didn't work as they were sticky from sleep. But then he tried again and they opened, letting him see the light that he had felt. He also saw that he was in a bed and in new clothes. But the most surprising thing that he saw was the person who stood at the edge of the bed. "Gandalf?" he asked, hope in his voice. He hoped that this was not all a cruel trick by Gollum or Sauron. But it wasn't. The wizard was there, just like he had been there at Rivendell. His color may have been different, but it was him all the same. At the sight of him waking up, Gandalf smiled and he couldn't help but smile back. Soon those smiles broke out into laughter. Why were they laughing? They weren't sure themselves. They were just joyful. Joyful at the fact that all they had gone through and suffered were finally over and that they were alive. They must have been laughing very loudly, for the door to the room opened and Merry and Pippin came in. "Frodo," Merry said at the sight of his friend. He and Pippin were glad to see him again, alive and well. Without warning, they ran to the bed and leapt onto it, shaking their friend with gleeful energy. He didn't turn them away, but held them in hugs and laughed with them. A loud roaring laugh came from the door, making Frodo turn his attention from the hobbits to look at the newcomer. "Gimli!" he cried joyfully at the sight of the dwarf, happy to see him again. His joy increased twofold as he saw Legolas come into the room and Aragorn followed. Together, the man and the elf joined the dwarf beside the bed. As he was glad to see that most of his friends were alive and well, Frodo's eyes kept searching for one more. And when he saw Sam standing at the door, dressed in clean clothes just like he was and smiling, he was relived. He smiled back at Sam, glad to see that he didn't look at him in distaste or disgust. "Don't just stand there," Sasuke's voice told Sam as his hand gave the hobbit a hard enough shove to send him into the room. Sam stumbled a little but was able to regain his balance. There was no need to push me, Mr. Sasuke, he told the man at the door. There was when you're standing there, he answered as he walked in with Izuna following behind him. Sasuke! Izuna! Said Frodo with joy in his voice at the sight of the two. The half-elf truly looked different from he last saw him at Amon Hen. There, he looked unsure of his path, always looking towards his teacher for guidance. But in the time since, he had grown into his own confidence, and was no longer unsure. Hello, Frodo, the half-elf said to him with a smile. You are healing well. Indeed he is, Gandalf agreed. Is it over? The ring-bearer asked the wizard. It felt like a dream, to have his friends surrounding high like this, and he wanted to be sure it wasn't. Yes, it is, he answered with a grandfatherly smile. You did a brave thing, Frodo. And for that I am proud of you. What he did was nothing short of stupid, Sasuke said harshly. He scowled at Frodo. You took one person alone with you as you traveled into the homeland of the enemy. Not even Naruto is that stupid, and I've called him a dope countless times. You could have gotten yourself and Sam killed. He stopped for a moment, and the rest of the fellowship thought that he was simply taking a breath to yell again. But, he began, you came back mostly intact and you did what you set out to do. I can't fault you for that. He turned his head to look over at Sam. You kept him out of trouble? When I could, Mr. Sasuke, the gardener answered honestly and truthfully. Sasuke, I thought I saw you riding a purple fox in Mordor, Frodo said to the shinobi. You did, he answered. But you weren't alone. Who else was with you? My friend, Naruto, he answered again. The blonde and the Konoha shinobi hadn't been seen ever since they started coming back to Minas Tirith. He had briefly wondered if they had left to go back to the elemental nations. Oh, that reminds me, Izuna said, turning his attention to Pippin and Merry. I talked to Lord Naruto on the march to the Black Gate, and I asked him if he had seen any Entwives. What did he say? Pippin asked, eager to know. Entwives? Repeated Gimli, feeling rather nervous about the sound of that. He had seen what male Ents could do and knew enough to respect and fear women, especially when they're angry. What is this you're talking about? Sam asked, equally confused. But the half-elf continued like he hadn't them. That's the part that confused me. He said he didn't know, but he became thoughtful. He looked over at Sasuke. Sensei, what did he mean by, that just might explain the Forest of Death, though? A spark of recognition appeared in Sasuke's eyes at those words. Ah, I see. That might explain it indeed, he thought to himself. But to his student he said, I'll talk it over with Naruto, just to be sure. Oh, okay. It was really all he could say. But he hoped that the Entwives were there. Now there's only thing left to do. What's that? Merry asked him. He looked down at Frodo. Tell us what happened since Amon Hen. All eyes turned to the hobbit. He swallowed a gulp of air, and then began telling his story. He told it all and no one stopped him. They listened as he told them about Gollum tracked them capturing him, and then him leading them to Mordor. He spoke of seeing Haradrim, being captured by the Rangers of Gondor, meeting Faramir, taken to Osgiliath, and then released. When he learned of Faramir's relation to Boromir and the latter's death, he wept. He spoke of how he could feel the ring growing heavier with each step he took to Mordor, and how thoughts of wanting it for himself plagued his mind. They were told of Shelob and how he was captured and then rescued. And finally, he told them of Mount Doom, how he succumbed to the temptation of the ring, and would have fled with it if not for Gollum. They had fought for possession of the ring and tumbled over the edge, with Gollum falling into the lava below, never letting go of the ring. He would have followed, if it had not been for Sam. For Sasuke, he felt a chill in his spine while he listened, even though he did not let it show on his face or body. There was one too many similarities between him and Gollum to be ignored. How they had obsessed over something, letting it drive them onto an edge that they wouldn't have been able to stop themselves from going over. The only difference between them was, like Frodo, he had someone to pull him back up. But unlike the Hobbit, he hadn't gone willingly. In the silence that followed, the only thing that broke it was when the shinobi turned to the wizard and said, I guess you were right back in Moria. The coronation of Aragorn as King of Gondor and Arnor as well as the High King of the reunited kingdom took place a week later. Both the leaders of the elves and the dwarves traveled to Minas Tirith to attend the ceremony. King Thorin III, also called Stonehelm, led the dwarfish attendees, of which the remaining members of Thorin's company were a part of. He brought sad news to the city as his father, King Dane II Ironfoot, had fallen in battle in Dale when Sauron's forces tried taking it and the Lonely Mountain. But that sadness turned to joy and happiness at the sight of Gimli meeting his father in a hug and raucous laughter. There was even a moment of pride in their eyes when they saw the mithril armor Sasuke wore. The elvish attendees were led by Galadriel, Celeborn, and Legolas' father, King Thranduil. Halder was also in attendance, following his lord and lady. There was a brief moment of tension when the dwarves and the elves met, especially between Thranduil and Thorin. But it was quickly taken care of by Sasuke and Izuna, with the shinobi pointing out to both parties that a fight while in the hospitality of Minas Tirith was not a good idea, and the half-elf looking threatening with aglows in hand and Sharingan ablaze. Both were quite positive that Galadriel had smirked during the entire thing. Once everything had calmed down between the two groups and everyone had settled in, the ceremony began. It took place on the highest level of the city, before the doors to the Hall of the King. There, Aragorn knelt on the steps before Galadriel, clad in regal armor that showed his status as a king and a warrior. In her hands was a crown that had been crafted by the dwarves long ago for his ancestor, Elendil. It was as those of the Citadel Guard, except loftier, pure white, with wings of pearl and silver in the likeness of a seabird. On it were set 7 gems of adamant, and at the crown of the helm was set a single jewel, the light of which went up like a flame. It had been given to her by Izuna, who had offered it humbly before stepping back into the crowds. And now, she placed it on Aragorn's brow. Now come the days of the king, Gandalf declared for all to hear. May they be blessed. The newly crowned king stood up from his kneeling position. He took a deep breath and turned to face the crowd, his hand finding reassurance on Andúral's hilt. He saw the tower guard standing at attention and keeping the people out of the way of the path, allowing him to walk straight to the tree and beyond. The sight beyond the city was still something he was getting used to. Gondor had been sight of the black smog of Mount Doom for far too long. But now, the darkness covering Mordor was now gone and the mountains did not look so menacing. The people of Gondor began to cheer at the sight of their king, who had finally come again. As soon as the cheering died down, he spoke. This day does not belong to one man, but to all. Let us together rebuild this world, that we may share in the days of peace. They cheered again, much more loudly. Even his friends clapped in approval at his words. As the cheering continued, a gentle wind blew in the air, causing what the blooming petals on the white tree to float on it and fall gently to the ground. It was a beautiful sight to be sure, even more so when the king spoke the words of his ancestor. Et Yarello and Arena Utulian. Sino Maruvane ar Hildinir ten Ambermeta, out of the great sea to Middle-earth I am come. In this place I will abide, and my heirs, unto the end of the world. The way he spoke the words were like he was singing an ancient song that was almost lost to the world. He sung it gently, making it sound like a promise instead of stating boldly like a declaration. Then he walked down the steps and through the crowd. With every step he took, he saw the people he had fought, saw the steward of his kingdom, and the shield maiden of Rohan standing by one another, dressed to befit their stations, bowing their heads to him as he passed. The new king of Rohan stepped out of the line of guards, a deep green cloak hanging over his armor. He bowed his head but never lowered his eyes. The king of Gondor was not offended by such actions as they were both kings. The bellman was dressed in his mithril armor, and his student wore his grandfather's armor. Both inclined their heads to him as he passed, and he took notice of similar their faces looked. As he walked, the Prince of Mirkwood came towards him. He did not wear any armor, only formal clothing and a thin silver circlet on his brow. Behind him was an honor guard of his people, following their prince. The High King met him and clasped his shoulder, as he did the same to him. Hanan Lu, thank you, the man said to the elf. He just smiled and stood off to the side. The king turned his eyes to the banner that stood before him. It was a banner of Gondor, with its tree and stones. He felt nervous at the sight of it. But as it pulled away and he saw who was behind it, his nervousness vanished and was replaced with joy. For it was his foster father, Lord Elrond, his foster brothers, Eladan and Elrohir, and the woman he loved, Arwen, who held the banner in her hands. She was dressed in a green gown that radiated in the light, and wore a circlet that did just the same. When she saw him, a smile appeared upon her lips. They walked towards one another, like they were in a dream and they were afraid that they might wake up. But as they stood before one another, able to see the love they had for another, they knew it was no dream. He reached out and took the banner from her with a gentle grasp, handing it quietly off to Legolas. She looked down, breaking eye contact with him and confusing him somewhat. He reached out and lifted her chin so they could see one another's eyes. They came together in a great and passionate kiss. The crowd cheered at the sight of their king kissing his beloved, twirling her around in the air. It was quite obvious what that meant. Not only had their king returned to them, but they were also getting a queen as well. Among the happiest were Arwen's father and brothers, who were glad to see her in the arms of the one she loved. When they were done, they continued walking forward, hands clasped together as they went around the tree to the other side. The crowd parted ways for them, allowing them to see the 4 hobbits standing amongst them. They wore what little finery they could get in such a short time, which consisted of clean shirts, pants, and brightly colored vests. They bowed their heads to the king. "My friends," Aragorn said to them, making them raise their heads up. "You bow to no one." To their great surprise, the king of Gondor bent the knee before them and lowered his head in respect to them. Arwen, the elves, the dwarves, the other members of the fellowship, and the people followed his lead and bent their knees in respect to them. The 4 hobbits just stared at them all, hardly believing the sight. They had not expected it. They had come to honor their friend and instead, they were the ones being honored. But amongst them, Frodo felt like he shouldn't be honored. He had almost let Sauron win because he had desired the ring. But these people did not know that, and he knew that it would not be wise to tell them such a thing. We're not interrupting anything, are we?" The voice of the 7th Hokage asked as he stood in the middle of the crowd, turning the attention onto him and his people. They had just appeared from out of nowhere, causing no small amount of surprise amongst the crowd, although keener eyes would later remember that there had been a brief flicker of a shadow above before they showed themselves. As usual, his timing is amazing, Sasuke thought to himself with no small amount of sarcasm. "As a matter of fact, you are, Dobe," he said to his friend as he stood back up. As he did, so did everyone else. "Oh, what are we interrupting?" the blonde asked with a small amount of sheepishness in his voice. He might have actually scratched his head with his hand if he wasn't holding something in them. In fact, they were all holding something. "His coronation," he answered, pointing at Aragorn. But instead of looking even more embarrassed, Naruto actually perked up. "Oh good, we're not late. I was afraid that we would be." "What are you talking about, Dobe?" Instead of answering him, the 7th Hokage walked forward towards the newly crowned king with his subordinates, following right behind him. Mostly everyone unconsciously held their breath for what might come next, unsure of what it would be. "King Aragorn, I apologize on my behalf and the behalf of my men," he said to the king. "We left your side because we felt that a gift was required for your coronation." "And what gift do you bring?" Aragorn asked him. He looked back at the shinobi and nodded once. They dropped what was in their hands, sending it all to the ground with a loud crash. People flinched back at the sound, but it was a momentary thing. Once the sound had passed, they leaned in to see what had been dropped. What they saw were weapons and banners, all orc make and bearing the Eye of Sauron. "We bring the gift of Minas Morgul being cleansed and purged," Naruto announced. For a brief second, there was silence. And then, there was cheering and loud celebration. The city that had been lost to Gondor, and had been tainted by the enemy's dark sorcery, was theirs once more. Minas Ithil had come again. But that was not all the shinobi had to offer. "Hey, I see the tree started blooming," the 7th Hokage remarked as he stared at the white tree behind him once the cheering had finally quieted. He had seen it leafless during the day after the siege and called it a sad sight. "Yes, it began to bloom as we returned," Aragorn said to him. For him, he was glad to see the white tree of Gondor blooming once more. But it's the wrong season for it to bloom, it could die. Plus, it still looks a little sickly. "You know, you really shouldn't be saying things like that out loud, Dobe," Sasuke remarked pointedly. Already he could see the angry faces on the city's people. If you're trying to get yourself run out of the city, you're on the right track. But Naruto was calm. Relax, team. I know what I'm doing. Really? He asked. It looks like you're trying to piss off the city. What? You don't have any faith in me? Very little, he told the blonde. But it was a lie and they both knew it. In any case, why don't I help out a little with it? Naruto asked rhetorically. Before anyone could reply or even tell him no, he turned and started walking towards the tree. As he came to a stop before, he looked at all of it, his eyes not missing a single detail. What is the lad doing? King Thorin wondered aloud. I don't know, Gloin answered his king. He turned an eye over to his son, but Gimli looked just as confused as they were. Naruto reached out his hand and placed it against the bark of the tree. Then he activated the chakra of the Kyuubi. Those who hadn't seen him do that before were stunned and awestruck by the sight of him being engulfed by bright yellow flames without being burned. They thought that one of the Maya or possibly even one of the Vala had come before them. A presence filled the air, lying on their shoulders. It was a comforting presence, filled with warmth and gentleness. To them all, it felt like a friend was there, watching over them. As he held his hand against the tree, Naruto pumped the chakra into it, bathing it with a warm light. As it took in the chakra, the tree began to bloom. At first it was with the petals of spring, but then they quickly turned into the leaves of summer, shining pristine white in the light of the sun. The tree itself seemed bigger and fuller of life as he stepped back and let the chakra vanish from sight. The people of Minas Tirith cheered at the sight of it now. No longer was it a dead thing, stating that the king was gone. Now it had a full head of leaves and stood tall, proclaiming that the king had returned. Soon enough, the entire city was swept up into a celebration. From the lowest level to the highest, people were in the streets with good cheer and celebrations on their minds. The enemy was gone, their city no longer stood under threat, and they had a new king and queen. There was plenty to celebrate. The taverns were fit to burst with people as they celebrated, toasts to the king and queen going up every few minutes it seemed. Even the dwarves and the elves had made peace one another to enjoy the celebrations, with another round of drinking between Legolas and Gimli, and the possibility of their fathers doing the same. But as all this happened, Sasuke and Izuna were not a part of it. They were being through the streets to the houses of healing, which had been emptied so the healing people could celebrate as well. Okay, what's going on, Naruto? Sasuke asked the blonde as they closed the door behind them and started walking down the corridor. Grima followed them at a distance of 5 paces, not saying a word. Why are we here? There's something that Izuna needs to see, Naruto answered as he led the way. Then why am I here? For support, he said shortly. Sakura's waiting up ahead for us. So that's where she went. After the party had started, she had vanished from sight. Apparently she had come here. They approached the entrance to the first hall. Sir, why are we here? Izuna asked the Hokage, coming to a stop. The blonde looked at him with a grim sadness in his eyes. When we took Minas Morgul, we found someone in the dungeons, someone who had been there for a long time and kept repeating a name again and again. Izuna's eyes went wide in surprise at those words. You mean that? He couldn't even finish the question, only looking at the entrance with a jerky motion of his head. Naruto only nodded once. The half-elf shouldered his way past him and into the hall. Both shinobi waited a moment before following him, ignoring Wormtongue as he trailed after them. Izuna looked around the hall, trying to find anyone that was there, becoming more and more frantic as he continued to see no one. Where are they? He asked himself. Where are they? They aren't here. Then he saw Sakura sitting on one of the raised platforms, holding what looked like another person in her arms. The second person's face was hidden from him, and the body was shaking with sobs. He went still at the sight of them both, uncertainty and fear halting his steps and his throat. Distantly, he heard his sensei and Naruto coming up behind him. But his attention was solely focused on the person in Sakura's arms. Mother? He said, forcing the word out. The sobbing stopped as the hooded person lifted her head slightly. Who's there? She asked with a voice that was hoarse from too much shouting and screaming. Who are you? Mother, is that you? It's me, Izuna, your son. She stiffened. Am I dreaming? No, you're not, Sakura told her reassuringly. He's right there. Izuna came forward and placed his hands gently on her shoulders while Sakura let go. She lurched back for a second and then forward, grasping her son in a tight hug, weeping greatly. The hood fell off as she held Izuna, giving Sasuke and the others a look at her face. Wormtongue was the only one who made a noise, which was a gasp of surprise, shock, and horror at the sight of her face. But even though he was the only one who made a noise, it didn't mean that he was the only one who felt like that. Sasuke was horrified by the sight. Bile threatened to rise up out of his throat by what he saw, only to be forced down by his will. What did they do to her? He said quietly to Naruto. We don't know, Naruto said quietly. But what she looks like is only after Sakura and Ino had healed her. What she looked like in the dungeon, I hope to Kami I will never see its like again. Grima walked around and towards Izuna and Gilran. My lady here, he said quietly as he took out a handkerchief and held it out for her. Both mother and son looked at him. Who are you? She asked, fear creeping into her voice. Izuna came to his rescue. This is Grima, mother, he explained quietly. He serves me loyally and faithfully. You can trust him. Wormtongue looked at him with surprise. Ever since he had betrayed Rohan, everyone who knew him had looked upon him with distaste and distrust, if not outright disgust. To hear someone call him that, and mean them too, was something he never thought he would hear again. And he was glad. But what was even more gratifying to hear was when Gilran reached out, took the handkerchief from his hands, and said to him, Thank you, Grima. Mother, I'm so sorry for letting you be taken that day, her son said to her, his voice thick with emotions and tears appearing in his eyes. Tears appeared what remained of her eyes as well. No, I'm sorry for leaving you like that, she apologized. Seeing the two reunite made Sasuke smile a little. He knew that his student hadn't been happy about the fact that his mother had been in Minas Morgul all this time. But now she was safe, horribly disfigured but safe. But there was something about seeing the love they had for each other that made him want to do something he never would have done. Naruto, we need to talk, he said to the blonde quietly. Naruto only nodded in silence before subtly signaling Sakura that they would be stepping out. They turned and walked to a different hall, one that was empty. What's up, Sasuke? The Hokage asked him once they were alone. The Uchiha felt nervous about what he was about to say. He didn't really know how to say it, and he feared that it would end their friendship. But the truth had to be told. It's about the night before we had set out for the Black Gate, he began. But before he could continue, Naruto did for him. Sakura came to your room and the two of you slept together. He stared at the blonde with a shocked look on his face, unable to hide it, or even try. How do you know that? He demanded. Had he spied on them? The truth turned out to be something else because I was standing outside, keeping guard and making sure you two weren't interrupted, Naruto told him without a hint of malice or cruelty. Those words shocked him even more, but they also knocked his head back into thinking and he soon figured out what was going on. The council put her up to this, he said. Yes and no, the Hokage replied. Yes, the Shinobi Council would like an Uchiha back in Konoha, and the way they figured it, if it wasn't going to be you, your child would work. His serious face softened a little. But like I said, that's only one part. And what's the other? Sasuke asked with a slightly angry tone to his voice. He felt like he had been cheated and used. What was worse was that his friend seemed to have known about it. Sasuke, do you think I'm a blind idiot? I see things, I watch, and I listen. Sakura may have given me 3 children and may be marrying me, but I don't have her entire heart. There will always be a part of her that will belong to you. He froze at those words, letting them repeat themselves in his head. It almost sounded like Naruto was lying just to please him, but he knew that the blonde would never do something like that. He sounded sincere and truthful. Are you sure? The blonde nodded. She wasn't coerced, manipulated, brainwashed, or forced into doing what she did. She did it of her own free will. I even asked to make sure that she was, and she said yes. And you just let her? There weren't a lot, if any, of people who would let that kind of thing just happen. Sasuke, She might not love me entirely, but I love her, he answered. She's the mother of my children, and she's going to be my wife. When she has your child, I will raise it as a part of my family. Some people might get rid of either the kid or the wife, but not me. I will love them and cherish them. That's why I kept watch. He looked at his friend closely. Do you love her? That night came back to Sasuke quicker than he thought. For a moment, he imagined what life would have been like if he was with Sakura. It was a nice image, but that's all it was, an image. He had his chance with her, and it wasn't there anymore. I cherish her, he finally said to Naruto, choosing his words carefully. And I wish the both of you a very happy marriage. The seventh Hokage smiled. Thanks, Sasuke, he said in reply. But that doesn't mean you're out of being my best man at the wedding, you still are. And I want you to do something for me. What? Stay around until the baby's born. If you're going to leave again, you should at least see your kid before you go. All right. It was 2 days later when the shinobi left Middle-earth for Southern Earth, for the ship that had brought them had arrived. Oddly enough, it was the same ship that had brought Sasuke to Middle-earth all those years ago. But what had been the most surprising was when Elrin had hugged the captain of the ship and called him father. There were many goodbyes from each side, as the shinobi had made friends with the fellowship and the others in the short time that they had been there. But there was nothing as heartfelt as Sasuke's goodbyes to the fellowship. In a rare display of emotion from him, he hugged each and every one of them, even Gimli, who tried to protest. There were tears in the eyes of the hobbits as he said his goodbyes. They took his hug and returned it vigorously. The last person who he said goodbye to was Lady Galadriel. She thanked him for watching over and teaching Izuna, who had decided to come with his sensei to Konoha where he would learn to be a shinobi. His mother was coming along as well as Grima. For he had decided that the penance for the traitor of Rohan would be to care for Gilran for the rest of his life. But she also told him something else. Middle-earth has not seen the last of you nor you it. You will come back, Thorken. The ship soon sailed away and night quickly came, sending everyone to their cabins. Sasuke shared one with Yugo and Izuna. That night he dreamed. The first dream he had was a hall of the whitest marble he had ever seen. Even the hall of the king in Minas Tirith paled to this sight. But while the marble was beautiful, the hall was plain in detail, and yet it didn't detract from it. There was a hallway behind him as he leaned against the entrance, and he could hear the sounds of birds in the air from the other end. But what dominated the room were the 14 titanic thrones and the men and women sitting upon them. When he looked at them with his Sharingan, he deactivated the eyes almost instantly. The presence that they commanded showed that they weren't human. He then noticed that both Izuna and Gilran, who hadn't taken off the cloak she wore to hide the damage done to her, were standing before the thrones, looking up at the man robed in blue. Together, they both knelt down to him. Lord Manwë, Izuna said in greeting. Rise, Izuna the Untainted, son of Madara, the elder king said in a voice that was like the sky, encompassing all who heard it but gentle. Izuna did rise to his feet but did not look the Vala in the eyes. You do not need to fear, Parrot Hill, the woman sitting next to the right of the elder king said to him. Dressed in a white gown that sparkled in the light, she was Varda, the spouse of Manwë. You are here to be given a choice. A choice? He repeated, still avoiding them with his eyes. You are half-elven and you have served alongside good men and women in defeating the enemy, Manwë spoke again. As such, I offer you the same choice that has been given to all Parrot Hill. Will you choose the elves and become immortal, or will you take the gift of men? For a long moment, he did not answer and Sasuke wondered what his student would do. Finally, he said, I will take the gift of men. But may I ask something in return? The Vala did not seem surprised by his request. You may, the elder king told him. I wish to live as a normal man, not as one of the Dundane. If I am to live as a man, I would not live long past the deaths of my friends. Very well, if you wish it to be so, Manwë said, agreeing to it. Then he turned to the half-elf's mother. Gilran, know that you were not abandoned while Minas Morgul. What was done to you will be undone. Before he could see or hear anything else that would have been said, Sasuke felt a cold breath on the back of his neck. Suddenly, he was yanked out of the hall and was being pulled through the air. He could see the world below him, but it was blurred and out of focus, disappearing faster than he could look at them. The sky grew darker and colder as he was dragged away from everything he knew. Finally, he was tossed to the ground. He was able to recover his balance easily and get back onto his feet. The first thing he saw was the large open doorway and what lay beyond, which was nothing. All he could see beyond the door was darkness. But from that darkness a voice came, whispering in his ear. "You made a promise." Even though he had never heard that voice before, he knew it and knew who it belonged to. He also knew where he was, as Indra had been here before. "I wasn't the one who made it," he called out to the darkness. "You are him. You bear the power I gave you all those ages ago," the voice of Melkur told him, making his left hand itch and burn at the same time. The doorway was still open and the darkness was calling him. But he did not want to go. He remembered his conversation with Aragorn and Moria, but he did not want to go. "Can it not wait?" he asked. "At least let me see my child before I fulfill the promise." "You won't have to," Hugo said from behind him. He quickly turned around and saw him standing there. "What are you doing here?" he asked, completely surprised. "Helping my friend," he answered before striding past him to stand before the doorway. "I offer myself in place of him," he declared to Melkur, his voice almost echoing in the darkness. "You would do this of your own will?" the original Dark Lord asked. "You would give yourself up to my darkness to save the one who made me the promise?" He didn't make the promise, his ancestor did. "But yes, I do offer myself. If it is freely offered, my brother has no right to take it from me. I accept you, monster. Step through and our agreement shall be made." Hugo, Sasuke as he saw the orange-haired man take a step towards the door. He stopped and looked back. "Don't tell me to stop, Sasuke. You have much to live for, and you won't be able to see it in here. Besides, he has the right of it. I am a monster. But I can do this evil thing for a good reason." "I wasn't going to tell you to stop." "Then what were you going to say?" he asked. "Thank you for being my friend." He smiled. "Thank you for keeping controlled. Goodbye, Sasuke. I hope this is the last time we see each other." He stepped through the doorway and the great dark doors closed shut behind him. The sound of them closing woke Sasuke up from his slumber. He sat up in his cabin's bed, seeing that he was still on the ship. For a moment he would have thought that all he had dreamt was just that, dreams. But then he looked over and he saw two things. The first was his student, Izuna, who was still sleeping. His blonde hair had darkened to complete black, the same color as his, and his pointed elven ears were now rounded. The second was that the bed Hugo had been sleeping on was now empty. He was gone, willingly offered to Melkur. Hugo would be gone now. What came next would be the third Dark Lord. Chapter 34, Epilogue. Location, Minas Tirith. No cell reception, the shinobi remarked as he stared at his phone. He had no bars whatsoever. But then again, he should have expected that. The Hokage did warn him that if he was going to send reports back, he would have to do it the old-fashioned way. That would be difficult, considering that A, he was fairly certain that this continent didn't have messenger hawks, and B, he had never worked with a messenger hawk. Well, that's what he gets for begging for this opportunity for the past 10 years. Seeing that there was no point in staring at the screen anymore, he closed it and pocketed it. He walked out of the alley and back onto the street. People were bustling about, going and up down the street, giving him plenty of chances to blend in. He walked up the street, moving through the crowds. As he walked, he looked around at the city he was in. He didn't really want to admit it, but this place made Konoha look like a ramshackle old town, which was ironic since this place was a lot older than his village and less technologically advanced. White stone seemed to be the choice of building material. Everywhere he looked, he saw white stone. It was in the buildings, the walls, and even the cobblestones. With their clean state, it gave the place a pristine look and feel. He had to keep himself from checking his sandals weren't leaving any dirt on them. But it was more than just the city that gave it that something. It was the people themselves. They were happy. At every person he looked at, there was happiness on their faces, or at least contentment. Children ran down the streets together, shouting and shrieking in the way they do when they are having fun. Men and women were openly talking as they shopped, stood in place, or walked. They lived in peace and happiness. A peace my dad helped forge if I heard the stories right, he thought to himself as he continued to ascend the city. And he had heard the stories right, they were all he and his siblings had to go on for their dad. That's why he was here. As he reached the entrance to the final level of the city, he noticed the guards standing in place before it. That might be a problem, he thought as he observed them. The Hokage had told him to go to the highest level of this city to start his search, but he never mentioned how heavily guarded it would be. That was just like Lord Hokage, always leaving a surprise for people. He looked all around the entrance, the surrounding area, trying to find an alternative way up. But to his frustration, the only way up would be to walk up the spur of the rock before him. It would probably be inconsiderate for the guards, but he needed to get up there. He backed away from the entrance, found a spot that was away from their sight, and proceeded to walk up the side of the rock. At the pace he speed walked at, running might have gotten a little too much attention. He was able to reach the top in under 10 minutes. He hopped up over the edge, making sure that none of the guards saw him do that. Compared to the rest of the city, this level was relatively empty. There was a large and magnificent building back up against the mountain, but the rest was just a garden. However, it was a beautiful garden. Flowers of all kinds basked in the light of the sun and took in its warmth. The crowning achievement of the garden was the tall white tree with silver leaves on its branches. There was an air of contentment in the garden that made him feel a little at peace with the world. As he looked around the garden, he noticed a statue of black stone at the narrowest part of the rock, where beyond it was nothing but open sky. He walked over towards it and noticed as he got closer that it was made of marble. The statue was a man, staring out at the mountain range in the distance. Even though it was all made from black marble, he could tell that the statue had been carved in such a way that he looked like he was wearing samurai armor, an old samurai armor at that. An odd thing about the statue was that its left hand was stretched out towards that mountain range, its fingers folded into the seal of reconciliation. How was it that the people of this land knew what that meant? They didn't have shinobi or anything close to jutsu. And yet there was that seal he had seen and used many times himself while he was in the academy. It didn't make any sense, until he looked up at the eyes and saw the 3 tomo of the Sharingan carved into them. It was only then that he realized who this statue was of. "Hi, Dad," he thought to himself as he stared at the statue of Sasuke Uchiha. "Halt!" shouted a voice, making him turn to see a guard come towards him. Took them long enough, he thought to himself. But in trying to avoid a fight, he simply raised his hands to where they could be seen. "Do not worry, I mean no harm," he shouted out in a slightly accented common tongue as the 3 guards came towards him. "What are you doing up here? This is the citadel," the guard on the left demanded. "Ah, that's where the king lives, right?" They raised their pikes just a little bit higher at that question. "What business do you have with the king?" the guard on the right asked him suspiciously. "I was told to go talk to him if I wanted to find what I was looking for. So, is there any chance of that happening?" It was probably a stupid thing to say, but he had to ask. Oddly enough, neither of the guards said a reply. It was the one in the middle who wore slightly better armor. What he said was, "By the Vala?" "Captain, what is it?" the guard on his left asked him. "Send for the king." "Captain Barragond?" "Go now," he ordered them both. They went stiff in the backs before finally lowering their pikes. With a salute, they took off for one of the buildings behind them. "Thanks for that," the Konoha shinobi said to the captain. "It will make things a lot easier for me." He paused for a moment. "Is it possible to lower my hands now?" "How is this possible?" the captain said, mostly to himself. "It's been well over 25 years since the enemy's forces had laid siege to this city, but you haven't changed at all. My lord, how is this possible?" I think you might be confused about some things." He knew that he certainly was. "I'm just going to lower my hands and wait right for the king to come by." He did as he had said he would, and the captain did not say anything. It did not take long for the king to come out of the throne room and out into the garden. He was a tall man and walked with a regal stride that befitted his station. But there was also something in that station that told the shinobi that he had earned his crown, not just inherit. There were some gray hairs on his head, but they added to his dignity. The clothes he wore were of a good cut, and he wore them like they were everyday wear, which they probably were to him. "What is it, Captain Baragon?" he asked the Solitaire, coming to a stop before him and looking him straight in the eye. Before the man could even speak, the shinobi did. "Hi there, are you the king?" he asked Aragorn, getting his attention and the attention of his guard. "I was told to talk to you regarding my mission." Aragorn didn't reply, for he too had been struck silent by the sight of the man, just like Captain Baragon. It was like he was looking at a mirror that went back a quarter of a century. The man before him looked almost like his friend, the man known as Krabender. There was only one thing different about him: his eyes. While the shinobi he had known and fought alongside with had black eyes, this one had eyes that were the green of newly grown grass. But he knew that the man was a shinobi. It was clear in how he wore the headband of one on his forehead. He was also dressed like a shinobi, with black leggings and a dark blue shirt. Over the shirt was a jacket, but not like what he had seen previously. There were no bulges on it that would indicate that it could hold something. In fact, it was rather plain and unadorned, with a high neck guard done with the same kind of green he had seen previously. All this was worn beneath the brown of a relatively new traveler's cloak. But even though the man looked incredibly familiar to him, he knew it wasn't who he thought it was. "Who are you, friend?" he asked. "Oh, right, I forgot to introduce myself. Sorry," he apologized before straightening his back. "My name is Itachi Uchiha. I was told by the Nanadame Hokage to find you in regards to finding my target." His nerves cooled at those words and he calmed himself. Those words might mean something different than what he was thinking. But this was a stranger he had never met before. Caution was a good thing. "And who is your target?" "My dad, Sasuke Uchiha," he answered. "The Hokage wants me to, and I'm quoting him directly, find him and drag his ass back home so he can meet the rest of the family he decided to dump on us." If he hadn't met the blonde all those years ago, Aragorn would not have believed that those were his words. But instead, he just smiled. "It will be all right, Captain Baragon," he told the guard. "Go back to your post. I will talk with this man." "As your wish, Your Grace," the captain said, giving him a brief salute. He turned and left, leaving the king and the shinobi alone. Suddenly, Itachi felt rather awkward. Here he was, before a king, and he didn't know what to say. He really should have paid more attention to those etiquette lessons Mom and Uncle Izuna had made him take. They had just vanished from his head. Fortunately for him, it seemed that the king was a mind reader or something, for he chuckled and said, "Speak honestly and plainly. I will not hold it against you." "That's good to hear," he said, full of relief. That relief almost vanished instantly at his question. "So you knew my dad?" "Yes, I did, and I still do. He is a friend who is always welcomed in my hall whenever he comes by." "Do you know where he is right now?" he asked, leaning forward to hear the answer. Aragorn could hear the hope and urgency in his voice. He didn't want to disappoint the man, but he had no choice in the matter. "Unfortunately, I do not. The last my family and I saw of Thorkin was well over 2 years ago." The hope left Itachi's eyes at those words. But he wasn't going to give up now. "Naruto warned you that this wouldn't be an easy mission," he thought to himself. Then he frowned and said, "Wait, Thorkin? That's not my dad's name. It is a name that has been given to him, the High King of Gondor," and Arnor told him. "It is Sindarin, an elvish language for eagle caller." He couldn't help but scowl. "I know what Sindarin is. My uncle taught me some of it when I was a kid." "Your uncle?" the king repeated. "Well, uncle figure," he amended. "But I believe he was from here, Izuna Uchiha?" At that, Aragorn smiled again. "Ah, I know him well too. How is he?" "He's good. He's married and a father." "That is good news to hear. We should send our congratulations to him." It had been far too long since he had seen the half-elf, although he was completely human now, according to Sasuke. But as he thought about it, his mind came back to what the shinobi had said. "What do you mean by the rest of the family? You mean you didn't know about it? I would have thought that my father would have told you or the rest of you guys." Tell us what? He couldn't help but sigh. Thanks, Dad, he thought sarcastically. He had never met the guy and already he was causing problems. Konoha's been getting children with a note addressed to the Hokage. The children always have black hair and the note always says that the children are Sasuke's and he wants Konoha to raise them. So instead of being the only child of Sasuke, he became the eldest brother, a role he was still trying to figure out. Aragorn, on the other hand, was just surprised by what he was hearing. He had never thought that Sasuke would want a family. He had always seemed content to wander the world, never settling down. But he could also see the irritation on the young man's face as he spoke about his own father, and he decided to do something about that. Have you taken notice of the statue behind you? He asked. Yeah, I did. It's nice work. It was made 2 years after your father had come back to Middle-earth. When he was approached about it being made, he agreed if only a similar one was placed in Minas Ithil, in pale white. Itachi had a feeling he knew who the second statue was going to be of, but he still had to ask. Who was the second statue of? Your father's friend, Naruto Uzumaki, Aragorn answered. We could not refuse him, for it was his friend who gave Minas Ithil back to Gondor. And my father's statue was placed here, because he helped defend this city. Suddenly, the seal of reconciliation made a lot more sense. The statues at the Valley of the End held their fingers in the seal of confrontation. Now, their descendants and successors had finished the fight. No. He saved this city. If he did not use his abilities to summon that eagle, his reinforcements would never have shown themselves. Oh, I doubt that, Itachi thought to himself. He doubted that his adopted father would have waited for a signal to stop the siege. But that was not his concern. Are you sure that you have no idea where my father is? I'm sorry, I do not. Kami, take it, he swore almost beneath his breath. Guess I'll have to start looking. He turned to leave for the entrance. Now that he was here in Middle-earth, he had a lot of ground to cover. But before he could even take 2 steps, Aragorn reached out and stopped him with a hand on his shoulder. Now hold on, young man. I cannot let you leave this city at such a late hour. Not when there is good food and a warm in my house. Stay the night so you will be better rested in the morning. I can't do that, he protested. I have to get on the road and find him. I insist. It would also give me the chance to send out messengers to the other kingdoms. They will let others know of your being here and will ask that they help you in any way they can. Itachi listened to those words and considered them. It would quite possibly a long time until he would have a good meal in his stomach, and now he was being offered one as well as an actual bed to sleep in. Plus, the messengers would greatly help him in his mission. All right, I will take your offer, he finally said. But I will only stay a night. Good, the king of Gondor said. Please, follow me and be welcome in my hall. He turned and began walking back to his hall. The shinobi followed him silently, only to pause at the steps of the hall. He turned back around and pulled out his phone. It was too good of an opportunity to pass up to take a photo. His siblings and the triplets would love it. Location: Glittering Caves. You know, laddie, I had been expecting you for almost a month now, the Lord of the Glittering Caves remarked as they sat at a table with the King of Rohan. The table they sat at was just one of many in the room, but they were currently alone. Sorry about that, Itachi apologized to them both from where he sat between them, with the dwarf on one side and the king on the other. But look on the bright side. It saves me the trouble of going to Edoras to ask if the king has seen Sasuke Uchiha. It is only fortune that you found me speaking with Lord Gimli, Ymir remarked. He had come to Helm's Deep and to the Glittering Caves to speak with the leader of the dwarven colony, only to have the son of Sasuke Uchiha accidentally barge in unannounced. He had apologized to them, quickly explaining who he was and what he was doing there, before the swords and axes came out and after him. Still, it helps. Well, I'm afraid that I won't be much help, Itachi, Gimli said to him as he poured himself a tankard of ale. I haven't seen your father in some time, and I don't know where he is now. Kami, take it, he grumbled, drinking the ale in the tankard before him. It tasted bitter going down his throat, but he still drank it. Ymir, on the other hand, looked rather pleased. Then I have good news for you. He looked at the King of Rohan, putting the tankard down on the table. You've seen him? Yes, not 6 months ago. He came to Edoras with a group of children, saying that a small band of orcs had attacked their village and made off with them. He had tracked them down, slaughtered the orcs, and brought the children back to safety. Hi, that sounds like Sasuke, Gimli remarked. Even after all these years, the raven-haired man was still saving children. Where did he go next? Itachi asked Ymir. He went east, I believe. Good, I've got a direction now. He stood up from the table, ready to leave. Now wait a moment, lad, the dwarf of the three said to him. You've only just arrived and you plan to set off once again? I've got a lead on him. You expect me to just take it slow now that I've got his direction? He demanded. Ymir King also said that it was 6 months ago. Where he went in that direction, he won't be there when you get there. You can afford to rest a day here and enjoy some feasting with us dwarves. He could see the logic there, even if he didn't want to hear it. So he sat down at the table again. All right, I'll take another then, he said, lifting up his tankard. Good man, Gimli said with a roar of a laugh. He took both his and Itachi's tankard to refill with ale from the keg at the wall behind him, returning in a matter of moments. Here you go! Thanks. The shinobi took the tankard and drank from it. The king of Rohan and the lord of the glittering caves did the same, and when they were done, they slammed the tankards down on the table, hard enough to rattle it but not hard enough to break the tankards. Ah, that's good stuff, the dwarf declared. Indeed, you dwarves brew a good drink, Ymir praised him. I'll let the lads know you said so, Ymir King. He turned to look at the shinobi of the three. So, Itachi, what do you think of my colony? Well, I haven't seen much of it, he admitted. But what I have seen was very beautiful. Even the room they sat in was beautiful. It was a good-sized room that could easily seat about 50 dwarves. The walls themselves were made of naturally polished rock that added to the beauty of them. The rock themselves were marble, but naturally embedded in them were gems and crystals along with veins of ore that flowed through them like water. The polished part of the caves came from the underground streams and rivers that had carved them out so long ago and still lingered in places, filling the caves with the sound of softly flowing water. To the dwarves who lived there, the sound was musical in such a way that no elf could compare to do. They found it soothing and relaxing, which was saying something, considering they liked their music loud and merry. Lanterns had been carefully installed in the cavern walls, filling them all with light. They made the gems, the crystals, and the veins twinkle, giving the room an illusion of life. I would have to say that if any shinobi from IWA were here, they would be very jealous at what they saw, Izuna finally said. In fact, I would say that they would probably try to destroy it all. To his surprise, Gimli laughed. Ha ha! I've had the same comment from both father and son now. My lads will be pleased to hear that. My dad said the same thing? He asked, surprised by that. Aye, back when the fellowship was going through Moria, he answered. His face became more solemn. Before things took a turn for the worse, that is. Itachi saw his face and wanted to know what he meant. What happened? You hadn't been told? Ymir was interested. The fellowship's journey through Moria was not one part they did usually talk about. He hoped to hear the story now. No, my parents weren't there when it happened. They could tell him plenty about his father's early days, but anything in Middle-earth before Minas Tirith was a blank. What happened there? It's best not to talk about it, the dwarf said shortly. It was still painful for him to think about those days, even after all that had happened. Now tell me, why you ended up here a month later than I thought you would. I was told about the statue in Minas Ithil and I thought that my dad might be there, so I traveled there to look around. He hadn't found Sasuke there, but the visit around the city wasn't worthless to him. I met the ruler of the city and his wife. I think their names were Faramir and Eowyn. You speak of my sister and her husband, Ymir said, a happy smile appearing on his face. How are they? They and their son are well. I believe that another one is on the way. The smile grew wider. I am to be an uncle again? This is most joyous news. I will drink to that, Gimli said. Itachi smiled. Your nephew will have his hands full in time. I know I did with my brothers and sisters. Both king and lord looked at him when he spoke those words. I would say that even though you say those words, you still care for them, Ymir finally said. Ah hell, I didn't mean like that, he said, feeling a little insulted at the thought. I mean, sure, they can vastly irritating at times and can drive me up a wall faster than I can blink, but I love them all the same. If someone harmed any one of them, they wouldn't live long enough to regret it. A pang of worry entered the Lord of the Mark at those words, for he remembered who left with Sasuke and Izuna all those years ago. Itachi, isn't there a man of Middle-earth living in your clan's home? The shinobi frowned slightly at the question, trying to figure out where he was going with this. Yeah, he serves Izuna's mother. I think that he once said that his name was Grima. What about him? You say that you would protect your family, yet you entrust them to the sight of him? To both his surprise and Gimli's, Itachi laughed. Are we talking about the same guy here? He's the man who babysat me whenever I was left alone in the house. He's the one who cares for all the children in the Uchiha compound. He's never betrayed us, not once. For the love of Kami, his name is Yujin. What does that mean? It means friend. He's our friend. The king of Rohan did not say anything to that. He had known Grima before his betrayal and might have considered him a friend. But his betrayal had colored that for the rest of his life. And yet, it had been 25 years since they had last met. Perhaps he had changed for the better. It certainly seemed like that after he had killed Saruman. Actually, he always said he had something to tell the king of Rohan if he ever had the chance, the shinobi continued, more to himself than any other. And what would that be? I am sorry for what I have caused. He was silent for the longest time before finally answering. When you return to your home with your father, tell him that I forgive him. I will, you have my word. Location: Mirkwood. When he stepped on a single fallen tree branch in the forest of Mirkwood, he was surrounded by elves with bows drawn at him. They had thought him to be an orc scout. After he had assured them that he wasn't, they took him to the king of Mirkwood. He was lucky to find that it turned out to be another of his dad's friends, Legolas. You are welcome to stay in my halls, the elf welcomed him with open arms. Unlike Aragorn or Gimli, who had some gray in their hair, he looked exactly the same as he did 25 years ago. The only difference about him from what Itachi had heard was now he wore his father's crown. That's okay, but I really need to get back on the road, he replied. Going east had been a bust when he learned in Dale that his dad had turned and gone west. Surely you can spare a few minutes to rest and collect your breath? He looked around the room they were in. It honestly looked like they were standing in the middle of a hollowed-out tree, which he didn't find all that surprising, really. He had heard about the elves from Uncle Izuna. It had a roof, which that this wasn't the only floor in the tree. The only other person that was there was a female elf with red hair the color of copper. She did not say anything to him, but he had seen her stand close to the Elf King when he was brought before him. You're right, a few minutes won't hurt me, he agreed. He could tell that the elf wanted something from him, but so long as it wasn't evil or ill-intended, he was fine. So, what do you want to know? If Legolas was surprised or caught off guard by the question, he did not show it. In fact, he just smiled. How is Izuna? I have not spoken with him since he had left. According to Sasuke, he has chosen the gift of men. Wait, my dad was here? Some years back. The hopeful look he had on his face fell just as quickly as it had appeared. Damn. I am sorry. The elf did look apologetic for his words and his news. It's okay, Itachi said, waving it off. As for Izuna, he's human all right. He said that the Vala gave him the choice and that they also healed Gilran. Truly they did? Legolas had seen Izuna's mother before they had left Middle-earth. It was a horrible and saddening sight to remember. To hear that the Vala had healed her was heartening news. That's what I've been told. I should probably also mention that he's married. That is good news to hear. Is he a father too? Yeah, that he is. I would know. I'm engaged to his eldest daughter. And it had been a fight in and of itself to make sure that she had stayed home. He loved her all the same and didn't resist the idea of marrying her, but this was a mission he wanted to do by himself. Engaged? The red-headed elf said. It was the only time she spoke. Sasuke had told me of this once, Legolas said to her, turning to face her. It's like a betrothal. Itachi saw the warmth in his eyes at the sight of her. It was small, but it was there. Hey, Izuna and his mom wanted to talk to some people here if they ever had the chance to come back, the shinobi said. I figured that since I'm here and they're not, I should pass on their words. Would you know them by any chance? I might if I know who it is they wish to speak to. I'll be honest, I wasn't really paying attention to what they were saying at the time. He was more focused on eating his dinner at the time. I think the first was a lady named Gala, something. The Lady Galadriel? Repeated Legolas. He nodded in acknowledgement. Yeah, that sounds about right. So, is she here or is she at the other forest? He knew there were two places in this part of Middle-earth that elves lived in and that she lived in one of them. But Legolas simply shook her head. I am sorry, but Lady Galadriel, her husband, and Lord Elrond have gone to Valinor, the Undying Lands. Oh. What else could he say? He didn't know the people. I guess I'll have to tell them when I get back. Do not feel sad. They had lived a long life that was well served. And Frodo has gone with them as well. Now, he had heard that name. Izuna had spoken of the Hobbit Ringbearer many times and was always worried about what might have happened to him after they had left. That is news I think they will be happy to hear, he said. Location: Bag End. I'm looking at a door in a hill, Itachi said as he stared at the door in question. I'm looking at a door in a hill. He knew he had already said it, but it was worth saying over again. Oh hell, they wouldn't believe me if I didn't show them. He took out his phone and took a picture. He had been to that a lot in the 3 months he had been in Middle-earth, taking pictures of every place he had been to, from Minas Tirith to Erebor, where he got a photo of statue of Madara Uchiha sitting on the skull of a dragon like it was a throne, and everywhere in between. But this just took the cake. Once he was done with taking a picture, he put the phone away and walked up to the door. It was a round door with a nice shade of green for color. It also reached his mid-chest. He reached out and knocked. On the third knock, it opened to reveal a very tiny child, who looked shorter than his youngest brother. Yes? She said, looking nervously up at him. He knelt down to her level, placing a knee in the ground. Hi, is this Mr. Gamgee's house? He asked. She didn't answer him. Instead, she turned back to the inside of the house in the hill. Papa, there's a big folk wanting to talk to you, she shouted. Well, at least she didn't slam the door in my face, he thought idly while standing back up and rubbing his ear. It didn't take long for what he could only assume was an adult hobbit come to the door, picking up the child in the process. Can I help you? The hobbit asked him. Mr. Gamgee? He asked back. Yes. It's nice to meet you. My name is Itachi Uchiha. He would have continued had the hobbit not interrupted him. And you're looking for your father, Sasuke Uchiha. He was surprised. Yeah, how'd you know? At that, he smiled. We do get letters here in the Shire, Mr. Uchiha. Quite frankly, we were expecting you sooner. Please come in. He stepped back into the hole and Itachi stepped in. To his surprise, he found that what lay beyond was nice and homey, making him feel instantly comfortable. But he had only taken a few steps before he banged his head on a beam. Being a shinobi, he was able to stifle his yelp of pain. However, he still had to rub his head. When he heard the sound of flesh hitting wood, Sam looked back at him and smiled. Pardon me, I should have warned you to duck. It's fine. Is there any chance we can talk about my dad soon? It can wait until dinner. Pippin, Merry, and their families will be joining us. Then we can speak about your father. Dinner, as it turned out, proved to be worthy of being a hobbit dinner, which meant it was full of laughter, warmth, drinks, and good food. Little hobbit children kept chattering at one another, seemingly oblivious to what the adults were talking about. So, he was here recently? Itachi asked the 3 remaining hobbits of the fellowship. They all had gray in their hair and had put on a few pounds, showing that they were no longer young by hobbit standards. Yes, a few weeks back, Pippin answered. Both he and Merry were now the tallest hobbits to have ever been born. How they got like that, they never would tell. He stayed in the Shire for a couple of days before moving on south. Dang it, he said, quickly changing what he was going to say after getting the attention of the mothers in the room. I missed him. We were wondering about that, Mary said to him. What was taking you so long to get here? He hesitated, unsure if he should give an excuse. But honesty seemed to be the best policy around here. I've run into orcs taking children and I've gone after them each and every time, he told them quietly, not wanting the kids to hear his words. The three of them just laughed. Like father, like son, Sam said wisely. Itachi took that as a compliment. But what are orcs doing their old tactics again? Pippin wondered loud enough for only them to hear after giving his wife an apologetic look. I don't know, Pip, Mary told his friend. I think that's something we'll have to ask the big folk about. For now, let us focus on dinner, Sam suggested to them all. They heartily agreed and they turned their attention back to the food. Itachi could only think of his family back home during his childhood. The triplets would always try and drive him crazy, Haru less so than his sisters, like older siblings were prone to do. Then his own siblings began being sent to Konoha, and the family just grew bigger. As the night wore on, the children began falling asleep and their mothers declared that it was time to go to sleep. They protested, as all children are prone to do, but eventually agreed. As they were ushered into a room to share and sleep in, Pippin's children wanted him to sing them a song, a plea that all the children began to give him. With a smile, he agreed and fetched his instrument, while the rest of the adults watched from the door. He soon played a song that was both sweet and sorrowful. To those who had heard before, it was a reminder of all those they had met and lost in the years. To Itachi, it was reminiscent of an adventure. Start the last goodbye. I saw the light fade from the sky. On the wind I heard a sigh. As the snowflakes cover my fallen brothers, I will say this last goodbye. Night is now falling. So ends this day. The road is now calling. And I must away. Over hill and under tree. Through lands where never light has shone. By silver streams that run down to the sea. Under cloud, beneath the stars. Over snow and winter's morn. I turn at last to paths that lead home. And though where the road then takes me, I cannot tell. We came all this way. But now comes the day to bid you farewell. Many places I have been. Many sorrows I have seen. But I don't regret. Nor will I forget all who took that road with me. Night is now falling. So ends this day. The road is now calling. And I must away. Over hill and under tree. Through lands where never light has shone. By silver streams that run down to the sea. To these memories I will hold. With your blessing I will go. To turn at last to paths that lead home. And though where the road then takes me, I cannot tell. We came all this way. But now comes the day to bid you farewell. I bid you all a very fond farewell. And the last goodbye. They were all asleep by the time he had strummed the last chord. He smiled and walked quietly out of the room. You play well, Itachi told him. Thank you, he said. I suspect that you will want to leave now, right? Yes, the shinobi answered with a nod of his head. He felt a little embarrassed, but if he was this close to finding his father, he had to go. But to his surprise, none of the hobbits looked like they were angry with him. We understand and we wish you a good journey, Sam told him. Before you go, we want you to give this to Azuna when you see him next, Mary said, handing him a bag of something. What is it? Longbottom leaf, he said with a grin. Pip and I figured that he would be missing the stuff. Location, Konoha. The gates were a familiar sight for Azuna that brought him relief. It had been well over a year since he had seen them last. As he took a step towards them, he stopped and looked over at his father. Do you need a minute? He asked. I'm not something fragile that needs to be handled with care, Sasuke told him. Let's get a move on. All right, Dad, he said, turning back to the gates and started heading towards them. The footsteps behind him told him that his father was following him. It felt a little weird to be near the man he had looked for in Middle-earth after wondering what he would be like all these years. He had finally found the man on a beach near the Grey Havens, speaking to an elf holding a harp. When he looked at Itachi, he had stopped. The elf seemed to understand and said goodbye, leaving them alone. Some people, the triplets and a few of his sisters, might have expected there to be a lot of words, introductions, and hugging. But the truth was far simpler. Sasuke had said that he was his son and that he had come to get him and bring him back to Konoha. Itachi nodded and said that was true. His father's reply was, "Well, we might as well get a move on. It's been long enough already." To Itachi's surprise, the same ship that had brought him was waiting offshore for them, but his dad wasn't. A boat was sent to them, and it took them to the ship. From there, it sailed to the elemental nations, taking them back home. And now they were here. They were home. Itachi couldn't help but smile as he looked at the city that lay beyond the gates. Despite all that he had seen while in Middle-earth, Konohagakure was still the most beautiful sight to him. He stepped through the gate, waving at the guards on duty that day. They waved back but then stopped when they saw who was walking beside him. Thankfully, they didn't say anything. "We have company," Sasuke declared suddenly, coming to a stop. Itachi looked at him, and then looked at the village. He did see someone coming towards, but the sight of the person made him relax. "Uncle Izuna," he said in greeting to the elder Uchiha. "Itachi, I see you were successful," Izuna remarked before looking at Sasuke. "Sensei," he said with a bowed head. "You grew out your hair," Sasuke remarked. The last time he had seen his student, his hair reached the back of his neck. Now, it was right between his shoulder blades. But that wasn't the only thing that had changed about his student. His face had a few lines in it now, showing how old he was. "And you grew a beard." There was indeed a beard of his sensei's face. It was thick enough to keep his face relatively warm through a winter, and it was short enough to make it look like it was still a part of his face and not hanging off it. Aside from that, there were obvious gray hairs on his head, and his beard and his face had more lines than Izuna. Like the rest of the fellowship, with the exception of Legolas, he wasn't a young man anymore. "Where is everyone?" Itachi asked Izuna, looking around and seeing no one else. "I would have thought they would be here in force." The former half-elf just smiled. "They're all waiting at the house, your mother and Lord Hokage too." "Does that mean the triplets are going to be there as well?" he asked, suddenly fearful. He laughed. "Don't worry. They've grown up, remember? Forgive me if I have a hard time believing that some days. They were older than him, and he was the one who acted like an adult." Before he forgot, he handed his uncle the package the hobbits had given to him. Izuna took it with a smile, barely looking at the symbol on it. Together, the three of them walked deeper into Konoha. As they walked, Sasuke looked at his hometown. While the village below the mountain remained relatively the same, it was up and behind the Hokage mountain where the changes were shown. He saw tall buildings made of glass and steel towering over the mountain, shining brightly by the light of the sun. The streets were crowded more so than he was here 25 years ago. But back then, he only stayed for 9 months, long enough to see his son being born and hold him. Now that son had tracked him down and brought him back. If the truth was being told, he had been expecting it for the longest time, and when he got messages from Aragorn, Legolas, Gimli, and the hobbits, he knew the time had come. During the time they spent on the ship, they talked. Izuna had shown him the most recent photo of all his children, which he smiled at. He knew that convincing their mothers that they would be safe in Konoha was the best thing he ever did, and he didn't forbid their mothers from visiting them. They soon came away from the busy streets and onto quieter ones. The people who walked there gave respectful nods to both Izuna and Itachi while giving Sasuke odd ones. Only the eldest of them knew who he was and they did not say anything. It had been too long already to come at for what he did. "This place has changed," Sasuke finally said once all the eyes were past them. "Yes, and for the better," Izuna told him. At that, he scoffed. "I'm sure that there are still troubles in this part of the world." "Yes, there are. Some countries believe that we should go back to separate villages and countries, not wanting to be a part of the Shinobi Union. There are also people trying to grab more and more power inside the Union. As a leader of the revived Uchiha clan, he had a voice in the Union and the village, something that he tried his best to do." "Are there troubles in Middle-earth?" "Of course there are. Orcs are getting smarter and creating bigger groups again and are back to their own tricks again, but it's nothing we haven't been able to handle. That's good to hear. If it wasn't something his sensei couldn't handle, he'd been worried. They soon turned a corner and Sasuke saw the Uchiha crest standing proudly over a gate. He knew that beyond the gate lay the clan compound, and yet, it wasn't where he had last remembered it. It was closer to the village proper. Standing at the gate were his two closest friends. "I see you finally decided to get rid of all that hair," he said to Naruto as he came closer. The Hokage smiled as he ruffled a hand through his short graying hair. "I would have looked ridiculous if I kept it at that length at my age. It's good to see you again, Sasuke." "You too, Naruto," he said as he looked over at the woman beside him. "You look good, Sakura," he told her. "Flatterer," she said with a smirk on her face. They all had gray in their hairs and they all had lines on their faces, but she managed to make it all look more graceful than either of them did. "Lord Hokage, I would like to report that the mission was a success," Itachi said to Naruto, coming to attention. "I can see that." "At ease, Itachi," he replied. "Well, let's get this show on the road. I've already got the rest of the Konoha 11 and their families coming over for dinner. I hope you took pictures." "Yes, I did. A lot of them too." "That's good. I look forward to seeing the rest of Middle-earth now," Sakura said before giving her husband a pointed look. "Hey, my second trip was a grand total of 15 minutes in a forest surrounding a tall iron tower, making sure that Ent women made back safely to the rest of their kind. How many times do I have to say that?" "That reminds me, sir," Itachi said, getting his attention. "An Ent named Treebeard wanted me to pass on his thanks to both you and Sasuke." He smiled at that. "Good to hear." He looked over at Sasuke. "Shall we?" His friend nodded once and began walking towards the house that lay beyond the gate. It was a large house done in the traditional style, something that suited right with him. The door that led into it was big and made of oak that showed its age. The doorknob was bright and shined in the light. But when he reached for the knob, his son stopped him. "I got this, Dad," he said. "You just stand right there." He reached for the door and turned the knob, opening it. He stuck his head in and shouted, "Hey guys! I'm back! And you're not going to believe who's with me." He pulled his head out and stood off to the side. If Sasuke had any questions as to why his firstborn would do something like that, they were gone when the rest of his children burst out of the house and bore down on him, all shouting "Dad/Daddy." They slammed him and sent him crashing to the ground. As he laid there on his back, all 15 of them crowded around his body, talking at the same time, from his eldest daughter telling him that she was happy to see him again to hearing his youngest sons exclaiming that he had been in time to see them graduate from the academy. He couldn't move from his spot because they had pinned him so well. All he could do was move his head around. And amidst the swarming black-haired children he had held soon after they were born, he saw Naruto and Sakura standing there with grins on their faces. They planned this, he silently realized. "Welcome home, Sasuke," Sakura told him. And to that, Sasuke Uchiha smiled a genuine smile. "I'm home.